If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. People who believe they've encountered the most frightening and terrifying supernatural or paranormal being. What's your story? My brother told me, maybe 14 years ago, that one night when he was falling asleep, he heard a loud bang sound. Not like a gunshot, but more of something hitting the wall at a high speed. He opened his eyes to find me standing in the dark corner of his room. My eyes were glowing red, he said. All he really saw was my shadowy figure and these bright red eyes. He called to me, asking, "What the hell?" Apparently, I didn't answer. He then continued, saying he turned his head to the clock near his bed and quickly looked back at the corner I was standing in and saw absolutely nothing. I was gone. What's even more terrifying is that he got up and went to his door. It was still locked. He opened it and walked down the hall to see my door still closed. He looked further down the hallway, only to see me standing in the middle of the hallway with my, still, glowing red eyes. He opened my door after seeing that, and that's when he became really frightened. There I was, laying passed out on my bed. To this day, he can't explain what or who he saw. After he told me all that, I have been seeing those red eyes throughout my life, but only in the dark parts of my house. It makes the same bang each time before the eyes appear. I sometimes see a figure. Tall man, black overcoat and a hat. With bright red eyes. It's a very unsettling feeling every time I see him. My aunt saw a little black man come up from the ground as a child. I first heard my grandma tell this story. Apparently my aunt was about 4 to 5 years old and came running from the garden, visibly frightened, and swore that she saw a little man come up from the ground in the garden. His skin was completely black, as in the color, not the race, and he wore a black suit along with a black top hat. He invited her to come down into the ground with him, but when he spoke, she could see he had little black razors for teeth. At that point she ran away. Now, Grandma says she's sure my aunt saw something. She was too afraid to make it up. My aunt says she vaguely remembers seeing something black in the garden but puts the rest of it to shadows and an overactive imagination. I'm not sure what to think of this. Anyone have any ideas of what it could have been? It was the fall of 2014. I was stationed in Okinawa, Japan, at Camp Hansen. I had a roommate at the time that slept on a futon while I slept in the government-issued bed. Late one night, around 3 a.m., I woke up with sleep paralysis. This had never happened to me before. I was frozen on my side, staring at my roommate sleeping on his futon. Standing above him was a black figure with his back to me, just staring at him. For 10 minutes, I could not move or say anything. I just lay there in fear. Once I was able to move, the figure disappeared in front of my eyes. I immediately turned on a movie, terrified of what I just saw. A couple nights later, the same thing happened. On my side, staring at my roommate, unable to move, with the same figure staring at my roommate. 10 minutes go by, and I'm able to move and yell out, "What the F?" Instead of disappearing, the thing turns towards me, and I see a tall black figure with a deathly white face with black or dark red eyes and mouth staring at me. It stands there for a few seconds and then disappears. After getting myself together, I stand up and search the room, finding nothing. I go to the sink, splash water on my face, and then go back to bed to put a movie on my laptop. As I lay back down, I look up from my screen to see the figure standing closer to my bed staring at me. I yell, "Get the F out of here!" And it disappears. Needless to say, I didn't sleep that night. The next day, a Sunday, I'm exhausted. I try to take a nap in the afternoon, but with all my lights on, terrified of what I have witnessed. I wake up to sleep paralysis again. This time, I watch my blanket slide off of my leg and feel a death grip on my knee. I feel this grip for about a minute before it lets go. I immediately went and bought a pair of shisha dogs, Japanese dog statues, and never had an incident again. I came to find out that one of my new Marines had been practicing lucid dreaming a couple rooms down from mine the first night I saw the figure. He said, with no mention from me about the incident, that when he was practicing lucid dreaming with white noise, he started lucid dreaming. He said he stood up from his bed and went to his sink to splash water on his face. When he looked up at the mirror, another face was looking back at him. A pale white woman's face with black holes where eyes should be and a black mouth. Duck that guy. Something my daughter told me terrifies me. This past year, my family went on a sabbatical in another country. My daughter, 4, talks a lot about returning to our old house, and something she said recently gave me chills. "Daughter, when we go back, can I sleep in mommy's room?" Me, yes, sometimes we can have sleepovers. But don't you remember, You have a huge bed to sleep in your room. All your toys are in there. Your stuffed animals. Daughter, but that guy, remember, I wake up at night because he's there with me. Me, mentally freaking out, what? No, I don't remember. What man? Daughter, he sits in the corner. He's all black, he doesn't talk, he just sits by me. Me, what does his face look like? Daughter, he has no eyes, but I think he has a mouth. Me, in shock, well, you can definitely sleep in my room. What the duck is that? Also, how is she so nonchalant about some terrifying thing in her room like this? My cousin played with children who had no faces. So about 2 years ago, my little cousin, let's call her Jaden, was 4 years old, and her family moved into a new house and started to renovate it. Everything was fine for a while until one day Jaden, out of nowhere, started telling her mom how she could see 2 kids in her room. If that's not creepy enough, the kids had no face, I guess it either looked smeared or just blank, and they had no arms. My aunt was creeped out, but she kind of brushed it off and thought maybe it was just an imagination. My cousin started bringing them up more and more. Telling more details about them. One is a boy and the other is a girl. They told her that they wanted her to play with them. Jaden said they were kind to her. But then, they started to scare her. I would have been scared from then beginning, but okay. She would wake up in the middle of the night screaming because she was so frightened by them. My aunt didn't know what to do. My cousin would be playing, and when my aunt asked what she's doing, she would say playing with the kids. I guess they were only mean sometimes? It gets a little more creepy. So besides there being 2 faceless and armless kids in her room, there was also an old man with a cowboy hat and cowboy boots, as she explained him. This man was a mean man, and Jaden was very scared of him. She said the 2 little kids were also scared of him. The thing is, the man was only allowed on the porch. He wasn't allowed to come inside since he was so mean. So as long as my cousin was inside, she felt okay. One night the family was eating dinner, and they started to hear footsteps outside on the porch. The door is right beside the table, and my uncle went to see if someone was out there. He came back and said he didn't see anything. Jaden, with a straight face, was just like, it's the mean man. He's standing at the door watching us, Dad. Of course my aunt and uncle were freaked out like what just happened. Then she said, it's okay, he can't come inside. That was a span of about 6 months. A few months later they moved, and Jaden never talked about the kids or the old man ever again. I'm not even sure if she remembers it, but I don't want to ask. I'm pretty sure it was very scary for her at such a young age. My aunt did some research about the house and saw an old man, who wore cowboy boots and cowboy hats, used to live there and died on the property. She couldn't find out about the kids, though. My fiancé and I had a bit of a frightening experience. He says ghost/demon, I say coincidence. It's pretty strange though, I must say. I hope this is the right place for this sort of thing. I'll keep it short and sweet. Pretty much I woke up in the middle of the night, 3 to 4 a.m., with a kind of creepy feeling, like that feeling you're being watched. I looked over at my fiancé to make sure he just wasn't trying to scare me, but he was fast asleep. I then look up and around the room, and something catches my eye, like a figure. It's pitch black, so I kind of strain to see it, but as my focus, I see a tall woman. My immediate thought was, aw duck no, but I collected my rational thoughts and decided it just could not be real. I was either still asleep or maybe there was something wrong with the shrimp I ate earlier. I kept staring, and she was still there though. Only 4 feet away from me I saw almost every detail. She was maybe 5 feet 8 inches, very, very thin in a white, long dress, a bob-like haircut, wavy and sort of wet looking, gray skin, and her eyes were as if she were suffering from acute liver failure and very dry. What got me the most was the smile, this grin that wasn't evil but wasn't all that pleasant either. I felt like I was staring at her for at least 20 minutes. Eventually I just tried to fall back asleep and hid behind my fiancé. I could fall asleep, I still felt something watching. I looked back up maybe 10 minutes later and saw nothing. I had decided that morning not to tell my fiancé, as he would have flipped all of the shits about it. He is frightened easily. Although after what he told me after he woke up, I had to tell him what I saw. He wakes up and tells me he had a nightmare. What he told me was that he was in the house during the apocalypse when he saw a demon woman standing behind him in the living room of the house. He described the woman, and it was almost just as I saw her, but with slight differences in the eyes and the clothing. The eyes in his dream were pure black, and he says she was wearing a flannel shirt and pants. We were wondering if anybody could possibly have any answers for this. What could it mean? If it means anything at all? This place in the woods behind our property scares the shit out of everyone who goes there, looking for potential scientific explanations. My husband discovered this place on horseback while herding the goats back into the pasture. They escape almost every day. Our ancient mare, who hates going faster than a trot, nearly threw him, and then he had to hold on for dear life as she bolted back to the barn at a full gallop. We got our rifles and went to investigate, thinking there might be a pack of coyotes or another predator that could threaten our livestock. Within 50 feet of this place, which isn't even worth photographing, it's just a clearing with 2 rocks and some bushes, we both became terrified. It felt like we were being watched at close range by some evil predator. I said, "Let's get the duck out of here." And we ran all the way back to the house. Over the years, we've taken about 30 people there. Everyone who hears about it wants to go, and all of them have the same reaction, pure terror, followed by running away as fast as possible. Dogs won't go within 100 feet of it, and the hair on their backs rises. We haven't taken a horse after the first incident, but that mare is as unexcitable as it is possible for a horse to be. I took my cousin there with her baby in a sling around her, and the baby started wailing so hard it had to stop to take breaths at about 200 feet. I'm positive there's a scientific explanation for it. We're going to ask our neighbor, whose property it's on, if we can call a university out to look at it the next time we see him, but he lives in Atlanta and only comes out like once a year, so it may be a while. Our current theory is that there's a cave underground that's making barely perceptible vibrations, or maybe something we read about called infrasound. What do you think? Went camping this past weekend in the forest, and Vailp, things got weird. So around 10 p.m. night 1, I hear some ruffling around my tent. Some teenagers I gathered were trying to have some fun, bothering me. Then I hear a gruff adult male voice say, "Arg, what?" I was laying in the grass. I get out of my tent with a weapon and see nothing. Some kid says from the shadows of the woods, "Are you a ghost too?" Typical. So I start pretending I'm talking to someone they can't see. I was wondering why they didn't respond to you. "You're probably a ghost, Mr. Insert whatever." All got quiet. I went back into the tent. After a second I see a light on my tent, then my vape lights up on its own pointed at the tent wall. Important to note here is that if someone was watching the tent, they would have seen where my cell phone light was, meaning they would know it wasn't me. About 15 minutes later, someone says, "Whatever that ghost was." And I had no further issues. Was my fake ghost friend a real friendly spirit? Were the bullies actual people or ghosts scared off by the friendly spirit? Or did the vape lighting up just legitimize my fake ghost friend and scare them off? If so, why would it randomly malfunction? Weird situation. Probably not camping there ever again. This is a story my father told me when I asked if he believed in ghosts or aliens. My father is a very logical, intelligent man who favors fact over speculation, and yet he still has no idea what he saw. I have made every effort to locate similar stories, descriptions, or any other relevant information, but I believe my father's account may be unique. Hopefully, someone will have some answers for me to give him. Background: in the 1960s, my father resided in a suburb of Denver, Colorado. He was a child, approximately 8 or 10, and had a younger sister, whom I will refer to as Stacy. It was Stacy and my father's turn to do dishes. Their sink overlooked a modest suburban backyard with a 4-foot-tall white picket fence. Stacy suddenly stopped and was transfixed on something outside. She said my father's name and told him to look outside. He described it as an 8-10-foot-tall humanoid. It was a rosy pink and see-through and had no describable details, as if it were wearing a big morph suit. And it was making the motion of walking but almost gliding/teleporting around the backyard, like clipping in a video game. Stacy became frightened and hid behind the counter. It was suddenly at the edge of the fence and bent over all the way. Its forehead would have been inches from the dirt in the neighbor's yard, hence the height estimation. My father blinked, and it was inches from his face on the other side of the glass. He said it had no features, and there were indents where facial features should have been. He was frozen with fear, and as quickly as it had come to his window, it was back by the fence. It then took an invisible staircase into nothing and vanished in thin air. My father said he has never seen it since, his sister never saw it again, and no one he has ever met has talked about anything like that. I've searched the internet and found that skinwalkers are the closest thing, but I can't locate anyone who is see-through. Hello all. I've been lurking for a while now to get a feel for the group and have had my fair amount of experiences that I knew, eventually, I'd write about one to share. Well, this evening, I had an experience with an entity that's followed my wife and me through several moves that we've come to terms with, knowing it's attached to either us or something we own, and that it's going to keep following us unless we do something to get rid of it. We simply call it the Peeker. The peaker is of unknown origin, but for as long as my wife and I have been living together, 2012, we've had experiences with it. Starting off, while we were just dating, neither of us told the other that we saw it. You know, not wanting to sound too crazy to the other. We both had paranormal experiences separately before we got together and had had a few conversations about ghosts, etc., but it wasn't until we moved in together that things escalated a bit. We realized that the house we were living in was haunted by more than one thing, and slowly we talked more and more about those things and were having matching experiences. It was great to feel validated that someone else saw and felt and experienced the same crazy moments, but also mildly frightening because, you know, ghosts. Well, the peaker got its name from what it does. For the most part, it's a shadowy silhouette of a person that we would catch peeking around corners, or from behind furniture, through windows and doorways, etc., before ducking out of view just as you turn to look at it. It doesn't always duck out of view fast enough though, and we see glimpses of it. One of its best tricks is when it peeks out at you from a mirror, like the mirror is really just another window or something. That always gives me a good scare. What's also been validating is that our dog has seen and reacted to it on several occasions, as well as the pets of some of our roommates we've had over the years. Through several years of different apartments and different rented homes, it's come along with us to all of them. And because it just gives us a bit of a jump scare and hasn't tried to harm us in any way, we've just cohabited with it. Well, tonight is the first time that it has severely shocked and scared me. I'm watching a show on Netflix called The Midnight Club, a pretty decent series, and I've got the lights low in the room to add to the fright factor. My wife's watching something else in the other room, so it's just me, my snacks, and my comfy recliner while I'm watching. Things are getting a little intense, and I'm subconsciously rocking my chair ever so slightly. The episode's gotten to a pretty visually dark scene, so I can faintly see myself in the chair I'm in reflecting in the low light off the screen, and I see a silhouette moving, rising from behind and to the right of me. As soon as I start to turn to look, I see two large, very not shadow white hands grab the side of my seat, forcibly stopping my rocking, pulling the chair back, and thrusting its face around the back of the chair to just inches from mine before disappearing into nothingness. That was the most physical experience I've had with the peaker, and probably any other paranormal entity I've come in contact with. Not only was it very up close and personal with me, but it grabbed my seat, stopped my rocking, and jerked it back. Needless to say, I stopped my show and turned the lights on while I mentally processed what just happened. Then I detailed everything out to my wife before sharing it with you all here. Several years ago, I was at a convention at a resort in the CA Sierras near Lake Tahoe. I have been at this place before for conventions and never got any odd vibes from the rooms I've stayed in. I have also had paranormal experiences, but except for this one, they haven't disturbed me or frightened me at all. The hotel was overbooked for the regular rooms, and I was upgraded to a suite. It included a small living room, a mini kitchen, a fireplace, and a dining area. The first thing I noticed was it was a bit dark, but I assumed it was just the location in relation to the property. Even turning on most of the lights in the room never seemed to bring enough brightness to the space. The first night in the bedroom area was fine, but the second night was a different story. I was asleep and suddenly woke up in the dark, feeling a distinct male presence in the room. It moved towards me in the bed and laid down almost on top of me. I could feel something completely evil, and as it grew closer over me, I jumped out of bed and yelled, "Get out of here!" I turned on all the lights in the room, and there was no one there. I ended up sleeping the rest of the convention on the pull-out couch and kept the bedroom door closed for the duration of the stay. I have never had an experience like that before or after. This specific event started when I moved to Fort Walton Beach, Florida, about 6 years ago. During the first couple of months after moving into my small house, me and my wife started noticing some pretty typical yet frightening events. I would say that I'm incredibly sensitive to paranormal events, and my wife hates that about me. When I met her, she was very skeptical and did not believe in anything paranormal. Where to begin? So I guess the real first event that happened in the house was while I was at work. I came home to my wife freaking out. She kept saying someone was walking in the attic. I assured her nobody could possibly walk up there. It was a one-story house, and the attic was barely tall enough to crouch in. I convinced her to blow it off, telling her it was probably an old house making noises. Typical stuff. This went on for 2 or 3 months until she was convinced someone was up there. She didn't want to stay home alone anymore, so I bought her a dog. About a week after our new puppy adoption, I went into the kitchen for something. Every single cupboard was open, the fridge, the doors, all of it. I immediately knew something was wrong. Nothing was missing, everything was just open. So we did what any rational person would do. I layered the floor with flour. We woke up the next day, and we found the flower had been moved as though someone drugged something through it, but no footprints could be seen. This is the point we realized we might have something interesting happening here. After dealing with this for a couple more months, the scariest thing that has ever happened to me occurred. I'm having the worst anxiety talking about this part, my eyes are watering and I'm choking up. Only ever told 2 people this, my wife and her mother. Hold on, my dog started barking, and my 4-year-old daughter walked in, telling me she heard a bang and people are talking in her room. It's 1:30 a.m., and I'm officially tripping balls. Continuing after laying her back down. Okay, so one night we go to bed, around a normal hour, and our dog sleeps with us every night. I wake up around 2:30 to 3 a.m. because I hear this deep growling noise. It's my dog. He's lying at the foot of my bed. I notice my bedroom door wide open, and as soon as I lay eyes on it, I gasp for air. My wife wakes up freaking out, thinking I'm dying. My dog sees this thing take off and chases it into the bathroom. No windows, no escape. I run in the bathroom as he's barking, and there is nothing there. Now I'm going to try and describe what we saw to the best of my ability. I honestly would have blown this off as a night terror had my dog not so violently woke me up and chased something into the bathroom. Okay, so as I sat up in bed, while my dog was growling, I saw something peeking around the corner of my door frame. It was only about 4 feet tall, and it had 3 fingers wrapped around the frame of the door, peeking its head in and staring at me while I slept. The only way I can describe it is that it had 2 small horns and it was all black in color. It had 3 very long fingers with very sharp nails on the door frame. The only facial features I could see were its eyes. Glowing white locked in my eyes. That's when my dog jumped and chased this thing. I've looked everywhere online for the answers as to what this is, every demonology book I could find, etc. Nothing. Even now, thinking about it still gives me anxiety. This is very strange, and at first I thought this belonged in a dream or night terror forum. Now I'm not sure. My boyfriend and I have been together for 9 years now. I've always suffered from night terrors. However, that's not something you bring up on the first date. This was back when my boyfriend and I had been dating for a few months and had recently started sleeping together. We were sleeping at his place. I woke up in the middle of the night and noticed we were holding hands. I thought it was cute, but I noticed that his hand was so pale and thin. My boyfriend has hands like an orc. My eyes got used to the darkness, and I saw his hands crossed on his stomach while I was holding a third, pale hand. As I became aware of this, something that looked like a woman with long, black hair hanging over her face sat up from behind my boyfriend's form, looked at me, and laid back down. I stroked the hand with my thumb as you do when holding hands with someone. I don't know why I did that, I just wrote it off as dream logic. This was at the beginning of our relationship, so I didn't tell him about it because I didn't want him to think I was crazy. Years passed, and we're now living together. He's very aware of my paranormal beliefs and night terrors. Out of nowhere, I came to think of that dream. Did I ever tell you about that night terror I had at your house when we just recently got together? I asked him with a little laugh. I saw someone who looked like Sadako in your bed when we slept. I almost got jelly, I joked, but he didn't laugh. He got very pale and said, "Did she try to hold your hand?" I got taken aback by his reaction. I told him I did hold her hand and never remembered stroking it with my thumb. My boyfriend then reviled to me that as a child he'd have a reoccurring nightmare that a woman with long black hair and white hands tried to hold his hands, but he'd wake up in a panic before she ever got to him. He'd never told me this because he just wrote it off as childhood nightmares. Now neither of us think they're nightmares anymore. El Hombre del Sombrero is a pretty famous entity known around the world. I would like to talk about multiple experiences I've had with this spirit as well as tell you guys about the experiences some of my family members have had with it. When I was a kid, I used to go to one of my aunt's houses a lot because she lived a few houses down from my great-grandmother's house. I've always had the ability to sense and see things other people can't, but this is something pretty common in both sides of my family, especially the women. The house itself felt like it had a very heavy energy, and it's something most people sensed as soon as they entered the premises. My first encounter with the man with the hat was when I was around 3 years old. I had always seen the spirit of a boy in that house. At that age I didn't know he was a ghost, and I was playing with him when he said he had to leave and looked very frightened. He left out the garage door, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I looked at the hallway and saw a huge black figure in the middle of the hallway. I'm not kidding when I say he was about 9 feet tall because he was about 3 inches close to the ceiling. I couldn't see any features, but because of the shape, I know it was a man with a sort of cape and a hat. Never in my life had I been so afraid as I was at that moment. I did what any 3-year-old would do, cry. This is one of the few memories I have from that young age, and I wish I could just forget it. Years passed and the man with the hat didn't appear again, but I did always feel him in the house, just like I felt the boy I had stopped seeing when I was 6. I had just turned 13, and I was helping my aunt clean the house. I went to her room, the very room she stopped sleeping in after an incident she had a week before that made her sleep in the living room instead. As I was looking for her purse, I looked back and saw not one but 3 shadows running from my eldest cousin's room to my younger cousin's room. I felt dreadful at the sight of the shadows because I recognized 2 of them. First was the shadow of a small person, the boy I used to see. Next was a slightly bigger one I always felt but never saw, and last but not least, you guessed it, the huge shadow walking behind the other 2 was none other than the man with the hat. I refused to leave the room as I saw the go in the other room I had to pass to go to the living room. I started to call my aunt, and as soon as she made it to the room, I told her what I saw, and we left for my grandma's house. She went pale as I told her, and she then told me the reason she wasn't sleeping in her room was because in the middle of the night she was awakened by something grabbing her throat and choking her. She said she saw a slightly black figure standing next to her bed as she struggled for air. After this event, a few months later my eldest cousin, an adult by that time, had the same experience of being chocked as he slept. A few years later, I was about 15, my little brother and I stayed at my grandma's house because my parents took my aunt for a night out with my other aunt, who was visiting at that time. It was about 11 o'clock at night when I heard my youngest cousin, a 21-year-old, knock on my window. I almost died when I heard him. I got out of my room to let him in the house, and when I saw him, I got scared. He was pale as paper and looked nervous. I asked him what happened, and he told me he was playing video games in his room when all of a sudden he saw something weird from the corner of his eye. He saw what was supposed to be a huge black figure with a hat crouched down. When he turned to see if he was hallucinating, the thing started to move but still crouched down. He bolted from the house and refused to go back until my aunt came back. A few weeks after that event, I went to the house. I never stopped going, because I wanted to see my aunt. She was alone and went to the neighbor's house to look for something. I stayed watching TV when all of a sudden I saw it. From the corner of my eye, I saw the man standing in the hallway again. I grabbed the keys and made the mistake to look back. He was walking towards me as I started to close the door, which made me scream bloody murder. I told my aunt, and she didn't go back into the house until my cousin came back from college. You may ask yourself, why did she keep living there for so many years after so many incidents? Well, she lived alone and raised her 3 kids there since the late 80s and was close to her mom, who gave her a hand on everything. The experiences happened every now and then, but it was usually pretty peaceful most of the time. My 3 cousins lived in that house up until they were about 23, but the youngest one moved into my grandma's house with my aunt because my grandma started to have difficulties taking care of herself. The house has been empty for almost 5 years now, and I passed by a week ago. Guess who I saw standing by the window? The 9-foot-tall man with a hat. My 9-year-old sister saw something. It was pretty early in the morning. My stepdad was at work already, and my mom was still passed out cold in her room. I was listening to music and browsing actually when my little sisters, Kate and Claire, came in my room scared shitless. They made me jump for sure because I was in a total state of bliss, I guess you could say. Kate was crying, and Claire was trying to explain to me what happened. Apparently the dogs were barking, so Kate went downstairs to let them outside. She then tells me that when she almost got off the stairs, she saw a shadow-like object move down the hallway. What's freaky is that Kate said that she heard the thing whispering before disappearing in the other room. Before she ran upstairs, she checked the other rooms to see if it was any real person, but there was no one but her and the dogs. So, frightened out of her little mind, she races back upstairs to get Claire, and that's where I come in. Not fully convinced, I listen anyway, and to humor them, I said I'd check it out. I then gave Claire a toy sword to protect Kate, and I myself brought down my baseball bat and cross necklace all the while Kate was repeating, "In the name of Jesus Christ, leave me alone." Funny thing to be doing at 8 o'clock in the morning if you want my honest opinion. But when we got downstairs, it felt different. I felt on edge the entire time because I'm wondering if someone is in the house that could hurt us or if it's something supernatural. Every room we'd go into, I'd get the growing feeling we weren't alone, like we're being watched. I still wonder if it was just my nerves or something else. So after we searched the house, we ended up going down the same hallway. Kate saw the thing, and there on the table was a lit candle. I asked my sisters if they've been messing with my lighters, and they said no. They looked just as surprised as I was. I know my stepdad wouldn't leave a candle lit when he leaves the house, and my mom was passed out upstairs sleeping. I was actually scared about this. I immediately told the girls to wake mom up and stay in her room till dad gets home from work, and I did a full sweep of the house before retreating back to my room. Later that evening, we confronted my stepdad, and he said he didn't even light a candle, nor did my mom. I trust my little sisters completely. If Kate was lying, then she's an awfully good actress because she was crying and shaking all over the place. Well, thanks for listening to my story. Okay, I should preface this by saying this happened to my girlfriend, now wife, and me around 2005 at our first apartment, which was a really old building built around the 1920s, and prior to this incident we had already experienced several strange and frightening things. When moving there, we noticed one of the bedrooms would get extremely cold even in mid-July. We live in West Texas. Also, my GF had a couple angel statues that her mom gifted her, and whenever we'd get home from work, they'd be facing the corner wall. It was almost like someone didn't want to look at them, so they'd turn them. One time my GF left for work early morning, and I was still in bed watching TV, and I heard the front door open and close. I figured she'd forgotten something. I called out her name and got no response. I turned my head towards the bedroom door and saw a strange face peek out the corner and hide. Scared the shit out of me. I ran to the living room, but no one was there. But the scariest thing to ever happen to us, and ultimately the deciding factor in us moving, happened one night around 10 p.m. My GF and I were at home listening to some music and having a couple of beers. This was pre-YouTube era, so we were listening to CDs on my Xbox. When we heard a knock on the door. We were wondering who could be knocking so late, so my GF noticed it was a little old lady through the peephole. We opened up, and this old Mexican lady in really old-fashioned clothes asked us in Spanish, ¿Está Crystal aquí? Ella es mi hija? Which means, is Crystal here? She's my daughter. My GF and I are both bilingual, so we understood her, but what freaked us out was that my GF's name is Crystal too. My GF is bugging out and tells her, my name is Crystal, but I don't know you. The old lady gets visibly upset and says, no, I've been waking for a very long time, and I know she lives here. Tell me where she is now. She's tearing up. I tell her, lady, there is no Crystal here for you, and I shut the door. My GF gets upset at me and says, maybe she needs our help. I swear on all that is holy and on a stack of Bibles that the door hadn't been shut for more than 10 seconds when my GF opened it and the lady had completely vanished. Our front door has a wide walkway that you can see someone walking up from a distance. There is no way a little old lady that frail could have run off or gotten out of sight that fast. We were bugging the duck out. I swear to this day I'll never forget that old lady crying in Spanish looking for her daughter Crystal. We moved after a week. A few years ago I saw a deerman thing in the woods, and now I can't stop thinking about it. So from around 2010 up until 2015, I lived in this town, Mexico, in Maine. My mom's family lived in a really small, like 500 total people, town nearby called Carthage. We would go up there for a week or so every summer and chill with our family. In 2015, we ended up moving away to where my dad's family lived. Sometime in 2017, when I was 13, my mom made some plans on Facebook with some relatives, and next thing I know, we're going to Carthage for a few days. On the last day we were there, one of the kids proposed we should go for a walk. I think after a few minutes of convincing, 7 of us, including me and my sister, decided to go along, so we just told our parents and walked out. That seemed weird to me. As a kid, I never just walked in the woods without my parents, but my sister and I just said whatever, and we went along. After about an hour, we come across a small clearing with some fallen trees and decide we should take a little break. The oldest of us, 15, I think at the time, had to go pee or something, so the rest of us just sat down and chatted. A minute or two later, he comes back and says we should head back now. A few kids were kind of sad, but my chunky ass was fine with leaving. At the time, I didn't even think about why he would so suddenly want to go back. After what felt like forever, we get to the road, where the house was just down the street, but I felt weird. Not frightened or worried, but off. I turned around and I saw a deer man? It was simply standing there, gazing at us. I stared at it for maybe a few seconds, but it felt like hours. After a second, I hear, "You coming?" from my sister, and I turn and keep walking. We get back, I get the Instagram of 2 of the other kids, and we eventually leave back home. I instantly DM the dudes, and we talk for like a week until I just stopped using IG for a while. I forget the deer man almost immediately after, and I move on. Like 5 days ago, one of them DM'd me. We talk for a while, then he mentions something weird in the woods. Then the memories start flooding in. We both talk to all the other people who we could get a hold of to get everything we can straight and discuss. Here's everything we concluded about the deer guy. It was 6 to 7 feet tall, hairy, had a head that looked like a deer's, antlers and all, and had a kind of hunchback. We agree it, at the very least, resembles the Wendigo of folklore, but I don't think it was. From what I know, they're linked with cannibalism, and as far as I know, none of us teenagers had any plan on eating each other. I would like to know if anyone had something similar or if this is a known legend in here that I'm just in the dark about. I'm a very skeptical person and a non-religious person, even though I was raised in a very Catholic family. I always try to use logic and reason before anything else, and I never knew what to think about this event. So this happened to me 20 years ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. I was a kid at the time, almost 10 years old. One day I woke up in the middle of the night. I don't know what time it was, but everybody in my house was already sleeping. I usually don't wake up very easily, I'm a heavy sleeper, and we used to sleep with the doors of all rooms open for no reason in particular. My room is in front of my parents' room across a very short hallway about 6 feet long. In this hallway we don't have any furniture, just the floor because it is a very short hallway. So as I was saying, I woke up in the middle of the night for no reason, and I wasn't sleepy or tired anymore. I looked at this hallway, and there was moonlight coming from my window directly to this hallway. It was dark but not much because of the moonlight, and I spot this strange shadow standing but moving on the same spot like it couldn't decide where to go. I didn't feel any bad feelings or chills, nothing negative about it. I was just seeing it with my eyes. It was a humanoid shadow. It had 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, and a head, but I couldn't see the face or the eyes, and I don't know if it was male or female. It was the shadow of a little kid but darker than anything I ever saw before, so I could distinguish it from the hallway, and it was moving so erratic but standing on the same spot in the middle of the hallway. If I could say something about it, I could say the shadow was disoriented. Don't get me wrong. Even though I didn't feel anything negative about this shadow, I was scared as hell. I thought someone was invading the property I got in planking position in my bed. Then I proceed to sit in my bed without breaking my visual contact, and I start screaming for my parents and for help, and that thing reacted to my voice, and it started to run away from me towards my parents' room, where their doors were open, and I saw how the shadow took a left and got inside of my dad's closet, which is a big closet almost like a little room, and the door was open. Then everybody woke up and armed himself with a gun and checked the closet, and nothing was there. We looked everywhere in the house and the surroundings, there was no evidence of forced entry, there was nothing, the thing just vanished. My parents told me that I was just having a terrible dream. But I knew what was a dream and a nightmare, even sleep paralysis. I could move and speak, but trust me, it was none of the above. I know to this day that what I saw was real. A few days ago, I told this to my friend in great detail, and he told me about the shadow people and about this forum. I just want to know what the hell that was. As long as I can remember, I've seen an abnormally tall, thin shadow person wearing a top hat. I've seen him inside my house, outside, at school, and even at other people's houses. Sightings include seeing him briefly peeping out from behind trees or buildings outside in broad daylight, and a couple times while using the restroom at school, I've only seen his feet standing outside the closed stall door. Even in the light, he has no features, just pure darkness, like black paper cut out in the shape of a person. I mostly see him inside, though. He sometimes stands behind my bedroom door and paces up and down the hallway by night. Several times while passing a mirror or other reflective surface, I can just barely catch a glimpse of him following closely behind me in my reflection, but when I spin around, no one is there. This isn't an everyday thing, just often enough that I can't discount it as something in my eye or catching something completely normal in my peripheral vision. And another thing is I'm not the least bit frightened of him. He doesn't have a threatening aura at all, it's more a sense of curiosity, maybe? I've read up some on the phenomenon of others seeing the Hat Man, and many describe a dreadful feeling when they see him. I've never felt that, not even as a child. I was just wondering how widespread encounters are with this entity or whatever it is. 80s Irish Shadow Man. I'm a girl living in Ireland. Basically, it all started in primary 7, when me and a friend's family were cycling through the grounds of an old famine-era workhouse, which is now either a small hospital or clinic, not sure which. Their dad suggested a race around an outbuilding, but I stayed behind. As I was waiting, I saw a tall figure beneath one of the trees in the grounds, beside a footpath leading off the grounds to a park. It reached the lowest branches, which were about 10 feet plus. It was wearing a dark hooded robe. It was so clear that I immediately thought either my friends were playing a trick on me or it was a massive Halloween decoration somehow tied to the tree. I called my friend's name, but they appeared behind me, having come back from their race. Before I said anything, they saw what I was looking at, and the dad set off towards it, saying not to worry, and it was just a dummy tied to the tree. We followed, but as we got closer, it vanished, it sort of melted into the shadows. We cycled the length of the path, which had razor wire fences on either side, trying to find a trace of who/what we'd seen but never saw anybody. They couldn't have run the length of the path before we cycled it, and the end of the path was visible from the start. From then on, I started having dreams that would feature a man in a black hooded robe thing. He always appeared in darkness and was surrounded by shadows, but the dreams were actually quite nice. He would sort of offer topical advice on what was happening in my life, which always seemed to help. Sometimes he wouldn't wear a robe, and he was pale with dark curling hair, quite gaunt looking. He almost always wears black, apart from the odd baggy poet shirt type thing, the most stylish of all the shirts and the zenith of 1980s fashion. If I'm honest, I'm a bit skeptical of ghosts and spooky stuff and would have ignored all this as just being a one-off weird prank and some dreams if I hadn't started seeing the hooded figure again in real life. Around the time of my senior years, lower and upper sixth, I started seeing a shadowy figure walking past the windows of my house, and when I saw my reflection in mirrors or screens, I would sometimes catch a glimpse of a tall figure behind me. My initial reaction was to think I was developing schizophrenia or had some sort of neurological damage I wasn't aware of. I actually asked a few of my friends if I ever acted delusional. One night, I was in the kitchen with my dad, who firmly does not believe in ghosts or gods and enjoys debunking the paranormal. I saw the figure outside, but I didn't say anything because I was scared I'd be sent to a mental hospital. I know now that's not how these things work, but it was a big fear of mine. Suddenly my dad was opening the back door. He went outside and, after a moment, started shouting. When he came in, he said he'd seen somebody outside and thought it was my grandfather or our neighbor visiting, but when he got to the gate, nobody was there. He made a big deal of checking the security camera he has installed in his garden, which showed nobody. My brother and father then both admitted they'd seen a shadowy figure walking past the windows at night, like me. On multiple occasions, there have been 3 or 4 people in a room when this happens, and we've actually had guests open the back door to let the man in, only to be very confused that nobody's there. It's so mundane and visible that your immediate reaction is to open the door and say hello. The dreams are still continuing to this day, and so are the figures. I'm not a paranormal person and don't come from a paranormal family. My grandmother and great-aunt on one side are very spiritual, and my great-aunt on the other is extremely religious, to the point of giving me relics she was gifted by a priest, but the rest of my relatives, including my brother, father, and mother, are all non-spiritual and interested in science. I don't know what to make of this. An online search only reveals some obscure Irish myths about the dark man, some stories that are clearly hallucinations, and a lot of scary/horrible experiences, which I definitely haven't had. About 9 years ago, when my nephew was around 4 to 5 years old, he began to talk about an imaginary friend who was constantly bothering him. My sister, thinking about how kids always have some sort of imaginary friend, thought nothing of it and proceeded on like it was nothing. As a few weeks went by, my little nephew kept mentioning how the imaginary friend was being really mean to him and stealing his toys from him. My sister finally got a bit scared since at the same time she started to have bad nightmares about someone stealing her baby, my nephew, while she was in bed, unable to move. Every time she said she didn't see anything or anyone, just a black figure as if covered with a fog machine that has black fog slowly making the baby rise out of his bed as if someone was cradling him. She decided to place a camera in his room and let him play like usual to see if she could catch anything. This was a bad move from her, as it is now apparent that whatever it was got angry because of the camera and lashed out at my nephew. My sister was in another room at the time and ran towards my nephew's play area as he started wailing and crying so loudly as if he just got hit. My sister managed to calm him down enough, and he said, "He scratched me, he doesn't let me play with my toy." As well as pointing at his arms to show her what looks like scratched marks bright red and barely showing blood, as if he only managed to break a small part of the skin to make it bleed. She proceeds to grab the camera, and the recording, and drive straight to my mom's house, rushing to get my nephew away from the apartment. There she explained what happened to my mom, and she, my mom, proceeds to call my grandma, who in turn directed her towards a local curandero. We are Mexican Americans, sort of like a Mexican witch doctor that rubs all types of herbs on my nephew to purify him as well as my sister from the bad spirits. He lets us know that someone has put a curse on my sister because of jealousy and that she needs to move apartments because a tragedy would unfold. I was being very skeptical all the while since all of this seems made up until my sister showed us and the witch doctor the footage that was recorded. On the tape, you can see my little nephew playing with his toy truck all the while talking to someone. Soon after, it looks like my little nephew is getting irritated and tells his imaginary friend to leave him alone. A few seconds of my nephew staring right beside him passed, and then you can see it, some little humanoid figure. You can't see its face as he is facing away from the camera, that is dressed like Peter Pan, with green overalls and even the hat, as well as a belt that looks like the one construction workers use. He steps close to my nephew, swats the toy down, and then scratches him. At this point he cries, and you see as my sister goes to him and turns off the recorder. After this, the witch doctor keeps doing all sorts of things with different herbs, all the while singing or chanting in some weird language, not Spanish. At the end of it, he produces a small cup with what looked like when you boil down Coke, and it turns into a gooey paste, except it has a really dark green color to it. She had to smear that on the apartment, around any entrance as well as all sides of her windows. After the nightmares ended, his imaginary friend stopped appearing. Needless to say, my sister moved out of the apartment a few weeks later and has made it a must to, not baptize but bless, all the places where she lives. We asked my nephew, since he is now about 14, about the event, and he says he doesn't recall anything. We've also tried going over the disc recently but found it weird how it's blank. Using the computer, it reads as a new disc, and I have tried various software to see if I could somehow recover the data with no luck. I tend not to believe in the supernatural, but when things happen inside your family, it's hard to ignore. I want to share this experience in hopes of finding others that may have had a similar one or discussing what might have happened. This is 100% true, and every time I tell this story, I get goosebumps on my arms and the back of my neck. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, my mother used to be into Ouija boards. She is a spiritual person, but as a kid, I was never into that type of stuff. I was into playing video games with my brother and playing outside. One night she asked if we wanted to join. We declined, of course, and we went to go play games in our room. She goes to do her thing in another room. As the night went on, we got worn out and went to bed. My brother and I shared the same room, and we both slept on either side of it in our twin beds. The way that my bed was situated, I could see into the hallway when I was laying down. I remember waking up that night, not sure what time it was, but I remember feeling peaceful. Usually when I would wake up, I would feel scared because it was dark, but this time it was different. I remember it feeling like some kind of sleep paralysis. I was staring into the hallway but couldn't look away. Then, a bright blue figure appears. It looks like an old man, dressed in a flannel shirt with a cane. He was walking past our door and stopped. He looked into our room, and I made eye contact with him. I don't remember him smiling or anything, but I felt completely at peace. I was not scared the slightest, and as a kid I would have expected myself to lose my marbles. A second or two after we made eye contact, he looked down the hallway towards my mother's room and started walking, leaving my sight from the doorway. I went back to bed after this, not scared or frightened, just peaceful. The next morning my mother was bringing my brother and I to school, and I started talking about what I saw. My mother burst into tears, crying hysterically, so much so that she pulled over to talk. I tell her the whole story, how I felt and what the man looked like. Her tears stop, and she starts to explain that she made contact with her grandfather through the Ouija board. My mother is from another country, and I have never met her side of the family nor seen pictures of them. My mother had a rough upbringing from her mom and dad, and even now, she talks about it very seldom. Her grandfather was someone she felt safe and comfortable with. When I was telling her what he looked like, she said that I described him perfectly, even the clothes he was wearing were something she remembered vividly. I haven't experienced something like that since, odd things here and there, of course, but nothing like this. That blue light will forever be burned into my memory. Ever since I was a child, I have been terrified of werewolves and wolves as well, especially movies about them, and as a kid I was crazy enough to watch them, but I covered my eyes whenever I knew the scary wolf was going to appear, so this obviously gave me terrible nightmares for most of my life. It was a Friday, on Halloween night, my favorite holiday, 2016, at the time I worked as an English teacher in a company I always thought did not appreciate me. On that night I was planning to watch a horror movie marathon like I did every year. However, I was thinking about watching a werewolf movie that year. But one of my coworkers recommended an old movie called An American Werewolf in London. It sounded scary, but I really wanted to face my fears and give it a shot. On that day, I was very excited because I had already bought candy for the trick-or-treaters and some beer for me, but I wished I did not have to work until 5 p.m. So, as soon as I got off work, I took my things and left my office. I drove my car home, which I called the Batmobile. To execute my plans, I listened to a song called Thriller, which I loved listening to on Halloween nights. I got home at 7 p.m. or so, then I took a beer from my fridge, drank a long sip, and heard the door ring, which scared me for a second, but then I heard trick or treat behind my door, so I opened it, complimented the kids' cool costumes, and gave them candy. The trick or treaters kept visiting me until 8 p.m., and all the while I listened to heavy metal and ate ramen for dinner. After that, I grabbed my laptop and watched my horror movie marathon, and I left the werewolf movie for last. I sometimes had to pause to get another beer, and it scared the crap out of me, but I still thought it was a great movie, so I was 6 beers in and decided to go to sleep at midnight. That night, I had a terrible nightmare, where I had to run away from a werewolf in a dark, foggy, and creepy forest, which was only lit by a full moon. In my dream, I was screaming my lungs out, and I felt extremely disoriented and afraid of the huge, bulky, black as night werewolf that was chasing after me. I ran for my life for what seemed like hours, but I felt the beast closing in on me. I turned around several times, and all I could see was its dark silhouette, bright red eyes, and yellow teeth baring at me. Then I screamed again and ran a bit faster now. Out of the blue, I came across a huge fallen tree that blocked my way, so I had no choice but to jump over it. I heard the werewolf growling and panting behind me, so it jumped the tree too. While I was still midair, I felt a sharp pain on my back, and I woke up suddenly. Then, I jumped out of bed from fright, hit my body against the floor, and cursed. I rubbed my eyes, got up slowly, and out of nowhere I felt a sudden and severe pain on my back, just like in my dream. I tried reaching for the place where I felt the pain, but I could not reach it. So, I went to the bathroom, washed my face, drank a bit of tap water, saw myself in the mirror, turned around, and to my horror, I observed 5 deep, bloody gashes on my back. I jumped forward and said, "What the hell is that?" The next day, I went to the hospital and got my wound patched up. I simply lied to the doctor and said my cat had scratched me while I was sleeping. I obviously did not own a cat. To this day, I still ask myself if that was just a crazy dream or did my terrified mind somehow make it a reality? Who knows? The truth is, I never watched a werewolf movie again, since I was terrified that I would have another nightmare as vivid and terrifying as that one. The house where a man killed himself. So, when I was about 9 or 10 years old, I lived in this trailer with my nana, brother, and dad in the middle of the woods. We had neighbors who were other trailer owners. I can't exactly remember if the house I lived in a man killed himself over his homosexuality or the neighboring one, but I've had 2 major paranormal encounters there. We're going to start off light with this one. I was chilling in my bedroom, which was next to the bathroom, and both doors to both rooms were wide open. As I was sitting on the floor playing with my doll, I looked up and saw a shadow of a man walking out of the restroom, so I called Dad. I got up and walked towards the restroom and saw no one there in the restroom at all, and if it was my dad, he would have nowhere to turn other than down the hallway, which I obviously would have seen and heard him walk down. This second encounter is even scarier because everyone was present. I'm not sure how this night began, but I believe it was because my nana started talking about the man who shot himself. We got to the conversation about ghosts, and then our small dog started flipping out and barking at the corner of the living room. We all stared in disbelief because he's never done this before. He'd go quiet, but whenever we said the word ghost or dead, he'd start yelling again. That whole night felt weird, and we all believe in these kinds of things and left it at that it was probably him. I saw the ghost of my cousin, who is still alive. My cousin, who I'll call Henry, is 25. He's trans and has been living the male life since his mid-teens. He eventually got hormones and surgeries in his early 20s. While he was in a female body, late childhood and preteens, he was SA'd repeatedly by our relative, as was his sister, and 2 more of my cousins. He's been getting help with his trauma but only keeps contact with safe family members like me due to the obvious. I love him as if he were my own sibling, and we're close. Last night, I saw him but not him. I saw him as a female staring at me. There were tears in his eyes, a stuffed animal in his arms, and it looked as if he had never come out of his egg. He was wearing a nightgown that he was forced to wear during the time of his abuse by our relative. I saw this, what I'm calling a ghost, while I was walking home around 9 p.m. I cut across the yard of an old shut-down convent in my home city, and this version of him was staring at me from under a broken archway to the building the nuns had their bedrooms in. I tried to approach, and I don't know why because I know this couldn't have been him, but I needed to help him. I started to feel dizzy and heavy at the same time the closer I got, and this was when I started feeling like I was in danger too. I suddenly felt more panicked and scared, terrified. I stopped moving towards him and just froze. I felt eyes on me but couldn't see anyone else through my peripheral vision. I was too afraid to look away from him. A groundskeeper who regularly maintains and lives on the grounds for the Catholic Church flashed a bright light at me and called out, but everything was dull and muted. I don't know what he said, it was just muffled. I wasn't able to move or react until he got closer. He didn't ask what I was doing or why I was there, he just told me it was dangerous at night and I needed to go home. I tried to talk, to tell him what was there, but he shut me down, and my cousin vanished. He escorted me through the rest of the yard to the opposite side and lectured me about being out this late by myself. After I was off their property, I called my cousin to check on him, and he was fine. I haven't told him what I saw. I'm not even sure what that was or if it really happened. I'm not a believer, but I'm still shaken a day later and have no idea what happened. I feel crazy. I am 23 years old, but I was 14 years old when this happened. It was heard/experienced by myself, my friend, 14 at time of event, my little sister and her friend, who were both 7 at the time, and our dog, Jake, the trusty black lab who has passed since then. This took place in my parents' 2-story, 4-bedroom house. They built the house in an already developing neighborhood. The only thing to note about the house is that it has a very high ceiling in the main living room that ended in the hallway upstairs. AKA very open layout, very echo-y, and very good at carrying sound. It was a fall evening, between 7 and 9. My mother was out to dinner and drinks with friends, and my father was out of town. My friend and I were in charge of watching the younger girls. The upstairs is relatively small, and we all had our doors open. There is no more than a 12-foot distance between any door to any room upstairs, 3 bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs. I distinctly remember not having the TVs or radios on so I could hear the other girls playing in my little sister's room while I and my friend, we'll call her Sarah, were in my room. Jake was lying at the top of the stairs, just snoozing as good old dogs do. We were all just hanging out when there was suddenly an extremely loud crash, as if someone knocked over an entire bookshelf and everything had fallen hard on the ground. Sarah and I froze and looked at each other, and there was a moment of dead silence until the little girls ran into my room and Jake began growling and snarling, looking down the stairs, his hair standing up. I glanced down the stairs and didn't see anyone, although Jake did not stop acting aggressively. I assumed it was an intruder and went into action mode. I locked the little girls in the upstairs bathroom with my phone and had dialed 911, telling them to call the police immediately if I began to yell, as well as to not open the door for anyone else but myself or the police. Being the badass I thought I was, I went and folded up my metal music stand into a weapon, I played violin, and Sarah and I slowly walked down the stairs. Jake had not come out of protection mode since the noise and maintained his low growling. He didn't leave his post at the top of the stairs until Sarah and I started down. At that point, he began barking and disappeared around the corner at the bottom of the stairs. Sarah and I went around to the rooms of the house, including the garage, and found nothing. Nothing had fallen. There was no sign that anything could have made such a distinct noise. When we checked the office, there was again nothing. However, Jake was launching a full-blown attack on the empty corner of the room. Scratching at the wall, snapping at the air in front of him, as if he were fighting a solid, seeable object. I didn't think much of it as we were checking the rooms because my goal was to find whoever it was in the house and somehow kick their ass with my 14-year-old best friend. No, we did not have the best logic or the best grip on reality. When we got done checking all the rooms though, Jake was still in that corner fighting with air, so I approached him slowly, talking to him, and trying to calm him down. Sarah was increasingly freaked out at this point, while I was relieved we didn't have to fight an intruder. When I got about 2 to 3 feet behind Jake, he jumped back, putting himself right in front of me, and his growling intensified. Sarah was already next to me, and I didn't think of the supernatural at all until what happened next. Jake backed Sarah and me up against the wall, and it was as if he was watching someone walk from the corner of the office out of it. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it now. He literally was turning his body and head and following something out of the room with his eyes. After a few seconds, Jake began whimpering and licking Sarah and me and nervously pacing around. Sarah straight up cried for a while, and we ended up getting the girls, going into my room with Jake, and calling my mom to come home. We never found the source of the sound. All of us agreed that it had come from inside the house, or at least seemed to, and then there was the way that Jake acted. Let's just say I'm still uncomfortable in my parents' home in the evening/night by myself to this day, and I certainly haven't had any shortage of strange experiences there. This one just stands out because I had 3 other people there to confirm at least the sound and 1 other person to confirm the way Jake had acted in the office. This happened to me a fair few years ago when I was with my, now ex, GF. We had been to the coast for the day, Bridlington, as I recall. By the time we were driving home, it was dark and raining, and I was unfamiliar with the route, so I really had to focus on the road signs for which way to go. We were driving along a dual carriageway, and I could see a sign indicating we needed to turn right at the approaching roundabout, so at this point I moved over into the right-hand lane in order to go right. This is when it got weird. For whatever reason, my girlfriend looked into the back seat and totally freaked out, saying there was someone sitting behind me in the car. There were only us on the day trip. At this point I spun around in my seat to have a look and couldn't see anything. I looked forward again and tried to adjust the rear view mirror to see if I could see anything, which again I couldn't. At that moment, a car came off of the roundabout we were now coming up to, facing towards us in our lane. This is when I had the horrible realization that we were not driving along a dual carriageway at all, it was just a normal two-way road, and we were now head-on with another car. I immediately swerved back over to the left and narrowly missed the oncoming vehicle. I hate to think how close it is. We pulled up as soon as possible immediately after the roundabout, which happened to be at a McDonald's, and just sort of sat there trying to compose ourselves. She was shaken and had tears in her eyes, so I asked her what the person looked like, and all she could describe was a dark, shadowy thing with a hood over its head. This really freaked me out, and I have no explanation of what happened that night, though I do get the feeling that it was something along the lines of a guardian of sorts. I'm avoiding saying angel as I'm a full-bore atheist, believe that there are no gods or angels, etc. This was the freakiest and most frightening thing that's ever happened to me. So what do you guys think might have been going on? This story takes place in the deep south. I actually work for a woman that buys plantations and holds quail, deer, and various hunts so rich people can show off their dogs and horses and get slammed at the same time. I'm a 21-year-old female that is not very tall or threatening looking. This happened Tuesday night around dusk. Earlier in the day, my coworker and I had been assigned 3 people to go deer hunting later that day. One of the main men in the party insisted on hunting at dusk instead of the beginning of the day like we usually do. Let me briefly describe the lay of the land to avoid any confusion. The plantation sits on thousands of acres and actually straddles land in between 2 states. We are miles in the woods, only accessible by horseback and rugged trucks. Every person in the group will be in their own tree stands, which we have to hike into after parking the truck. The tree stands are spaces about a minute walk in between each other in this sort of L shape, with only rough paths to go on. I will actually put myself in a ground blind, the very last person in the L. Around 2 in the afternoon, my coworker and I get the 3 people settled in their tree stands. My coworker settles into a tree stand in between 2 of the group members, and I walk the last man, Alan, to his tree stand before heading to my blind with the hunting dog that I always keep with me, aptly named Cujo. I recall the afternoon being very tranquil and relaxing. I grew up with a dad who was an avid hunter, so I've always been comfortable with the woods. I do remember the woods being quieter and quieter than usual, but it wasn't creepy or anything. After sighting nothing except for a few turkeys, I sling my gun on my back, gather Cujo, and start back to the woods. Since it is illegal to hunt after dark, not to mention people get hurt easier, we all pull out at dark. So I waited until 6 p.m., when darkness gathers quickly in the woods, and started to walk to the tree stand of the man closest to me. The idea is to work our way backwards to the truck and gather the group on the way. As I walked to Alan in the lengthening shadows, I noticed nothing out of the ordinary until I came to his tree stand. He was pointing his gun at me. I instantly grow pissed. We tell the members roughly what time and direction we'll approach them from to leave, so Alan should have known it was me. As Alan scrambled out of the tree, I impatiently waited on him, ready to tell him off. Did you hear them? What? I now notice that Alan is covered in sweat, his shirt has large sweat rings under the armpits, and his face is red, unusual in the cooler weather. His eyes are darting frantically around as if he expects something to jump out at us. He nervously licks his lips and looks at me. I heard whispers. Now, I don't know about anyone reading this, but one of the things that you do not want to hear deep in the woods is the phrase "I heard whispers." I won't go through the entire conversation, but I slowly coaxed everything out of him. Alan was fine until around 5 p.m. when he heard voices. He had initially thought it was me, perhaps talking to my coworker or Cujo, and had begun to exit his stand when he realized that it was the voices of 2 men. For whatever reason he realized that something was off and stayed at the top of the ladder. He said that he could never make out of the words, but he could clearly hear 2 distinct voices whispering in what sounded like a conversation. Sometimes a high-pitched laugh would go on for a few seconds. Since he was concentrating so much on the voices, he did not immediately realize that the undergrowth was moving around. He could clearly hear branches and sticks snapping. Then he realized something else, they were making circles around him. Like they were ducking with him. The voices, laughing, and walking around him continued for an hour, then abruptly stopped roughly 10 minutes before I walked up. The entire time, the poor guy was practically having a heart attack. As soon as I got the whole story, I quickly began to rush us out of there while hooking Cujo to his leash. I won't go through the whole montage of us walking back, but I was highly unnerved the entire time. After getting back to the truck safely, my coworker began to question the other members of the party. No one else had seen or heard anything. No whispers or things creeping by them in their stands. However, at the point everyone was freaked out, and we got the duck out of there. I have no idea what Alan might have seen. The woods can be strange places sometimes. I've heard noises before that I can't quite explain, but nothing like this. Alan has been hunting numerous times, so I can't explain it all about city folk getting uneasy in the darkening woods. Thanks for listening. If anyone has heard or seen similar things, I would be greatly interested in hearing them. My most frightening experience, demon experience. This happened 2 months ago. I was in San Diego with 3 of my closest friends because we were attending a concert, so we booked a hotel room for that matter. The night before the show, we were pretty tired, and we wanted to go to sleep early so we could rest as much as we could for the show. So I went to sleep in the same bed as my best friend, and in the other bed, a nightstand separated them, were my 2 other friends. In the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly, and in the corner of the room, I saw this big black figure that was staring at me, directly in the eye, and I sensed this super heavy dark/bad energy around the room. I knew there was something wrong. At this point, the energy was so ducking bad that I knew I was in front of a demon himself. My best friend woke up, and she was really confused because I grabbed her arm and squeezed it so hard she started hurting. I don't recall this act, and she told me to calm down and to stop accusing her of things she didn't do. She told me I was telling her to stop staring at me and scaring me, to just let me sleep. I don't recall telling her any of that. The only thing I remember was seeing the demon in the room instead, and it was staring right into my eyes. After all the confusion and shouting, we calmed down and got back to bed. At this point, none of our other 2 friends had woken up. They were sleeping deeply. I was very, very scared. I think I've never been more scared in my life, but I really didn't want to scare her by telling her I had just seen a demon, so I let her go back to sleep. After a few minutes, I started telling myself to not let him get to me and that I wasn't scared anymore, so he couldn't feed off my fear and he could go away. I know for a fact that if you build up a wall in your mind and don't let it get to you, it really won't and it will go away, so I did that with all of the energy I had left, but as I was telling all of that to myself, I sensed a second wave of super heavy dark/bad energy, if you can call it that way, and the energy was going towards one of my 2 other friends who were sleeping, the one who was just across the nightstand, and I knew this demon had something to do with her. I don't even know how, I just knew, and their connection was so strong that just looking at her made me really uncomfortable and scared. A few minutes went by, and I repeated to myself the things I said before and tried to build a bigger wall in my head, and I did, and eventually it went away and I went back to sleep. The morning after, we were getting ready to go to the concert, and I started talking to my best friend about the night before, and I told her and my 2 other friends that I had seen a demon, and before I got into details about what I had experienced, the friend that had the connection with the demon approached me and told me right in the eye that what I had experienced was because of her, that she had a demon with her and sometimes it manifested, and that she was so sorry about it, and that I shouldn't be afraid of it, that she wasn't afraid anymore since she had dealt with it for years. The craziest thing about this experience is that I didn't tell her, or anybody, at that point that I knew they had a connection. I still can't explain how I knew or sensed the connection between them, the demon and my friend, but the thing I knew is that it was very strong. Later she told us that since she was 12 years old, she played the Ouija board by herself, and she thinks the demon has followed her since then. This story is a real-life experience. I was spending a summer with my dad after I finished kindergarten before starting 1st grade. We lived in a double-wide trailer out in the sticks on a gravel back road. The type of area where you had some woods to play in or headed across the street to the recently harvested cornfield to play kickball, tag, or some other childhood game. My dad and I lived with my dad's brother and his wife, as well as their 2 daughters. My cousins were a little older than me, about 4 years or so. We decided to play hide and seek one evening in the woods behind the trailer. So many spots to hide, laying down behind a fallen tree, ducking in a riverbed, hell, if you were really crafty, you could pick a tree and climb till you could see the whole area. We're on like round 3 when my eldest cousin said, "Is that an abandoned trailer?" When we all regrouped, me and her sister both shot glances in the direction of her stare, and sure enough there was, but it didn't look that old. Just had the standard moss on the sides and dirt buildup you'd expect a trailer in the woods to have. We sat there and stared at it for a second until my eldest piped up again and said, "You guys want to check it out?" To which me and her sister, both young and eager to venture and rebel, quickly said yes. We get up right next to it, and we can see through the kitchen window, and it's definitely abandoned. But it's weird, everything is so dusty and disorganized. But not trashed or ransacked. Just kind of like unorganized clutter. We get to the front door, and oddly enough, it was unlocked. So we get inside, and the amount of dust in the air is so thick you can feel it when you breathe, like trying to breathe through a t-shirt. We get to looking around, and there's so much cool stuff. An antique rotary phone, engraved wooden cooking utensils, old glass maple syrup decanters, etc. This place was like it was preserved in the 50s or 60s. We made our way back to the master bedroom, and it was so eerie. An old, freshly made bed with a heavy-duty wooden frame, a vanity with various perfumes and makeup items. Even a small jewelry box, one of the ones with the ballerina in it. We start looking in the closet, and I see this old wedding dress preserved in clear plastic wrap. But it was weird because it looked like it had less dust on it than any of the other things. That's when a cold chill ran straight up my back and made every hair stand. I turned to my cousins and said, "I think we should leave now," and they agreed, but my oldest cousin grabbed the jewelry box and said, "Finders keepers," and took off with it. I wasn't going to fight her about it because I was younger and smaller and really just wanted to get out. As we're walking out, we notice one of those old candlesticks with a light bulb in it that was on the table lit up like someone turned a switch on, but there's no way this place has electricity. Immediately we're all spooked and run out the door. As we're running away, we look back through the kitchen window again, and all we see is what looked like the silhouette of a very frail old lady with visibly frizzy hair, but it was so dark no features could be seen. My cousin still has the jewelry box to this day and it still freaks me out. This happened to me when I was on summer break in the middle of high school. I was hanging out with my best friend, staying up all night, but his mom kicked us out of the house because I wasn't allowed to sleep over. So this seemed like a normal night. We went to my house and messed around on my 360 until my dad kicked us out because he had work and didn't want to get woken up. We walk around everywhere, the sun is fully set. We're messing around talking about random stuff. Shooting the shit, when he says, "Let's go walk over to City Hall." We were walking there when we noticed it was unusually empty and quiet. Now this is in the middle of Rhode Island, and everyone's out and about up until 2 a.m. So we thought this was strange, but we ignored it. We took stupid pictures with his iPod Touch and my M3, then decided to go towards his house using the main road because we were sure it was the quickest and safest route. We walked past my street and then noticed there were still no cars on the road. It was only 12 a.m. at this point. I pointed it out to him, and he dismissed it. Now this main road to his house was maybe 1 mile, so it should have only taken 20 to 30 minutes to walk at our not so fast pace. Midway through this road, there is a gas station. And only 2 blocks down from my street, I stopped us and told him, "Do you hear that?" The sound was light static, like a radio and TV combined, but very muffled and quiet. We looked down the street, and at this gas station was a person. Now we just thought this was a homeless person, and from the way homeless people in downtown Providence act at these hours, we didn't want to go near him. So we crossed the street. But so did he. At this point he was stumbling, mimicking us crossing the street without skipping a beat. My friend noticed this, and he freaks out, going, "Look, do you see what he's doing? He's got to be on drugs or drunk," in a loud whisper. I started getting chills running down my back because I had realized he was mimicking me. It was like I was puppeteering his legs, but the rest of him was completely out of it, swaying, leaning backwards with his arms flopped out. I became petrified when he started walking by a light post, and I realized that I could not see anything of detail on him. There were no clothes on him, no face, just a black silhouette. He continued to walk towards us, despite my attempts to mimic his movements. I started running back and forth on the street, and at one point it looked like he was basically sliding across the street like a glitched video game character. Then he got within 2 blocks of us, and my friend and I both instantly just got an equally horrific feeling because we both liked each other and said, "We need to run, there's something wrong here," more or less. And on the count of 3, we sprinted off the main road down the block only to stop at the 4-way intersection. We were under a street lamp, and we just looked down the street to make sure he kept walking. All of a sudden he stopped in the corner at the main road, and we were asking each other, "What the hell is he doing?" When he burst into a full sprint towards us. We didn't skip a beat and turned into track runners, running towards my friend's house on the side roads. We got a block and a half away and looked back only to see this black figure walking away in the direction he was chasing us, disappearing out of view. It looked like the black outline of a zombie, in all honesty. We sprinted to the main road and kept walking, nervously talking about what just happened. Everything turned normal when a car passed by, but then went dead silent again. We noticed that not even the police were parked where they usually sit during these hours, but they kept walking. Now before his street, there is a highway that separates the neighborhood, and to the right of that, before the bridge, is a small building for getting your alternative high school degree. We were walking past that, suddenly hearing what sounded like extreme static, like the sound from Back to the Future when the DeLorean time travels, only ear-piercing. The entire sky lit up blue, then faded to black. Time seemed to slow down for a few seconds and then return to normal with the sky. We realized that the sun was coming up, which was the most incredibly bizarre thing ever. It had just been 12:27 when I looked at my phone, and it was suddenly 6 a.m. We stood on the bridge, noticing everything returning to normal and talking about what happened. I refused to walk back home and crashed at his house until I walked to my house with his girlfriend at the time because her and I were getting kicked out again for not telling his mom. The entire thing has me completely confused 9 years later, as it did the day it happened. I remember when I got home, I slept for nearly 26 hours, and I woke up with my mom asking me if I was feeling sick. I'm not too much of a believer in the paranormal, but I'm not too much of a skeptic either. I just thought some of you might find this anecdote interesting. When I was 11 to 15, back in 2007, skinwalkers were not as popular in American folklore as they are today. No one ever really talked about them, even when discussing ghost stories, unless you were deep into that sort of thing or knew/were Navajo. And since I lived in the Midwest, that was virtually no one. I had heard of doppelgangers, but of course I just thought it was old German fairy tales. Regardless of what it was, after moving into a house in a brand new subdivision, my family would regularly, for years, hear each other calling for the other when only one person was home. I'd be home from school alone while my parents were out and my sister was at cheer, and I'd hear either my mom/dad/sister open the front door, close it, and announce, "Abby, I'm home." And I'd come downstairs to greet them only for no one to be there. I specifically remember a time I was home alone and my mom called for me across the hall, "Hey Abby, come here for a minute." I came out of my room, thinking it was weird she was calling for me because I, rightly, thought she wasn't home, walked into my parents' room, and no one was there. I remember thinking something along the lines of, "Damn, this happens a lot," and just going back into my room to keep playing Sims. Then one day I got curious and asked my family if it happened to them, and it was happening with them just as much as me. Like I get randomly hearing your name once in a while or even a full sentence, but this was constant and with all of my family members, so I wasn't just going crazy. Apparently we'd all hear each other when we weren't home saying things along the lines of, "Hey X, I'm home. Hey X, can you come help me? Come here, X. I need you." Funny thing is, this never creeped any of us out in the slightest. Even now, when I bring it up, they just shrug it off while acknowledging how weird it was. It never scared us or felt threatening, and absolutely nothing else ever happened. Never continued when we moved out. The house was new, and the land was just general Kickapoo hunting territory before it was farmland that got sold for development. It honestly never creeped me out until skinwalkers became more widely known. Still, I don't think this occurrence really fits that. I do have a friend that says he heard a mimic in the woods around here, but I don't know how I feel about that. 2007 to 2011, we definitely had something about that house mimicking each other. I'd give it's paranormal or not, but I have no explanation for it now. "Hey Haley, I need you for a second. Come here. Abby, come down here. I need your help. Andy, I'm home." Like, full sentences, we'd come into the room, shrug it off, and assume we were crazy. For 4 years. I've always held something of an affinity for cemeteries. Every family vacation included a trip to one, famous ones at least, Key West, New Orleans, Savannah, San Francisco, or Philadelphia. I suppose it was because of my parents' love of history that they brought us to these places, but my parents also tried to instill in my siblings and me the value of life and a respect for the deceased. Needless to say, since a young child, I've found cemeteries to be places of beauty. In the city where I grew up, cemeteries were obviously cemeteries. But when I moved to the South, I started encountering small, private, family-style garden cemeteries littered throughout rural areas. These fascinated me. Some years later I purchased a home and unintentionally ended up buying in a neighborhood just a mile away from a large cemetery, or, as they call the grounds, a memorial park. It's a large cemetery in the middle of a large public park. While the park's hours are sunrise to sunset, there are no gates at the entrance or exit. Public indeed. I enjoy running and incorporate it into my cardio routine as much as possible. I know there are mixed feelings about people exercising in cemeteries, but as I noted above, given my background and upbringing, I never saw my presence in a cemetery as being disrespectful and would sometimes include a run to and or through the memorial park in my route. However, I'd usually turn down the volume of my earbuds real low while I was on the grounds, and I only ever kept to the paved road, avoiding any walking trail or path. One fall, just as the evening temperatures were getting cooler, I miscalculated my run and ended up a quarter of the way into the memorial park right at about sunset. I would never run in the park after dark. Ever. Partly because I didn't want to break the rules, and partly because I felt that would have been disrespectful. The sun was setting, but it hadn't yet set. There was plenty of daylight, but it was fading fast. I should have turned around and run right out of the park, but for whatever reason I didn't. What I did was turn off my music and pick up my pace. I had every intention to get out of there and fast. About halfway through the park, my legs almost involuntarily slowed down, and my run became a light jog, became a walk, and then I just stopped. In all the times I'd been on these grounds, I'd never heard such silence. No birds, no bugs. No rustling of leaves or branches. Not even the wind chimes adorning several of the trees made a sound. There was this unusual silence that hung heavy in the air. I stood there and looked around. I didn't see anything, but I felt a whole lot. I willed my feet to move, but after just a few steps I stopped again. Goosebumps then traveled from the top of my head all the way down my body, hairs on my arms and legs standing on end, and my breath caught at my throat. It felt like someone, something, was watching me, and it did not want me there. Instead of staying on the paved road that would have looped me around the rest of the park and then back out to the exit, I caught sight of a path, just a few feet away, that I knew would cut through the park and take me to the exit in a straight shot. "Sorry. I'll head out," I said aloud. This time my feet didn't fail me, and sure enough, almost as soon as I started down the path, the silence started to slowly lift, like all the nature around me started to gradually fade up. By the time I was a mere 50 feet from the exit, a breeze blew through the park, and the evening air just came alive again, wind chimes and all. But by then the sun had fully set, and what little daylight remained was fading fast. It was then I realized that whatever compelled me to stop my run to make my way out of the cemetery had done so at the right moment. I'd only been halfway through the park. Had I continued on my run, it would have been dark by the time I made it to the exit. Also, interrupting my run right at the path that intersects the park could not have been a coincidence, could it? In fact, the part of the cemetery I avoided by not continuing on the road was the older part, the part with the original mausoleums and military graves. The part of the cemetery with the old money family plots. Bigger, older trees. Denser foliage. Something inside me told me whatever I'd just experienced wasn't malicious. The heaviness, fear, and uncertainty I'd felt turned into something like appreciation. Just before I walked out, I turned around, gave a slight bow, hand over my heart, and softly said, "Thank you." I know it was dark and my eyes could have very well been playing tricks on me, but I swear I saw the blur of a shadow move behind a tree immediately to my right. The banshee. I grew up on a farm just outside of Limerick in Ireland, which, as you can imagine, made for quite an eventful upbringing. It also meant my back garden was bloody massive, so I had plenty of space to run around outside, playing make-believe with my two sisters. And without a shadow of a doubt, our favorite toy was the little Wendy house that Dad had built for us at the end of the garden. I don't know if they have those in the rest of the world, but basically, a Wendy house is like a little miniature playhouse for kids. And I say little, but Dad had built us a massive one, with like a little hallway and a kitchen and a little ladder going upstairs to a little loft. It was absolutely adorable. Me and my sisters just loved it. So much so that one summer's night, when it was warm enough, we asked Mom and Dad if we could sleep out in the Wendy house one night. They were understandably reluctant to give us permission at first, but we pestered them until they finally relented. We could have a sleepover in the Wendy house, but we had to be on our best behavior, not fight, and promise not to go walking around in the dark. It was a deal. You can understand our parents' reservations too, because the end of the garden I mentioned was probably about 100 meters away from the actual house, near this old shuck that backed out onto some woodland. Not the ideal place to leave your kids alone overnight. So that's how 3 girls under 10 years old ended up in a dimly lit, wooden playhouse, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night. And for some reason, my older sister Kathleen decides it would be a good idea to tell ghost stories. Kathleen has always been a bit strange. She's always had a fascination with ghosts and ghoulies and witches and whatnot, ever since she was young. And since she'd gotten her hands on a book of Irish ghost stories, she thought she might regurgitate one of the stories she's read to us. She started telling us about a ghost that actually originated in Ireland, that unlike a Dracula or a Frankenstein, which come from other countries, as 9-year-old her put it, we truly had banshees in Ireland, since that's where they originated from. Our minds are absolutely blown. Ghosts lived in graveyards, old houses, and other haunted places. You had to go to the haunted place to see one. But here's Kathleen, telling us about a ghost that actually comes to you to tell you that someone's going to die in your family. And the way it lets you know this is by screaming in the middle of the night, like a ghostly, ear-piercing wail. Kathleen goes on to tell us that these banshee are women who have died in terrible, painful ways, hence the screaming. And that they look like shriveled old women with red eyes who carry bowls of blood. We were just about to tremble in our pajamas by the time Kathleen's finished describing the nightmarish appearance of the banshee by torchlight, but somehow, when Dad came out to interrupt and tell us it was bedtime, we managed to get comfy and drift off to an uneasy sleep. The next thing I know, I'm wide awake in total darkness, and everything is deathly quiet. Then I hear something that was so frightening that, at first, I think I just froze up in complete terror. It was a shrill, ear-piercing shriek, almost gravelly too, as if it had come from the throat of an old lady. When I finally found the courage to move, I shot up from my makeshift bed, shaking my sisters awake and telling them to listen. We just sat there in the darkness for a moment, all three of us terrified, until we heard the screech again. Hearing it for a second time had me just about out of my mind with fear, but my little sister took it even worse. It's a banshee. I remember her crying, "We have to tell Mom and Dad." Then my big sister, God bless her, decides that even though she's terrified, she's going to run to Mom and Dad so they can rescue us from the banshee. Say what you like about Kathleen, but she believed her own hype. She thought there was a banshee out there just as much as us. I mean, what else could have been making those ungodly noises out there? We're frantically looking for our torches, but in our panic, we can't find them. And when the banshee screams for a third time, Kathleen decides she can't afford to wait any longer. She gets up and, in complete darkness, climbs down the little ladder, opens Wendy's house door, and runs off to fetch us rescue. While Kathleen was gone, me and my little sister managed to find one of the torches. So, we flick it on and point it down at the Wendy house door from the loft. I don't know what the logic of that was, but that's what we did. Then we cuddled together, cried, and waited for the banshee to get us. After a minute or so, we hear rustling outside Wendy's house. Something was moving outside. We're so scared of the thing hearing us we've got our hands over our mouths, but we still can't stop crying, and we still don't turn the torch off. Suddenly the door opens, and what stepped inside made me and my little sister scream in pure horror. Blood was pouring down the mouth and chin of my big sister. And now she's back in the light. Now she too can see that she's bleeding. She smears a bit of the blood on her fingers, looks at it, then promptly collapses. We are absolutely inconsolable at this point. Me and my little sister are begging, screaming, and crying for our parents to come and save us. To us, Kathleen just ran out to get help, and the bloody banshee's only gone and gotten her before she could make it. We're trapped, the banshee's getting closer, we're doomed. Then there's more footsteps outside the Wendy house, heater footsteps now, banshee footsteps. The door swings open again, only this time the face that appears is our dad, wanting to know what the feck is going on in there. We're screaming, "Dad, there's a banshee, be careful, it got Kathleen behind you, Dad." He's obviously skeptical about anything at first, but when he sees Kathleen's face, it's his turn to be terrified. He turns ashen, grabs Kathleen's little body up in his arms, and then rushes back to the house with her. So, keep it in mind that even at this point of parental intervention, Dad has not taken the time to tell us that there definitely isn't a banshee. And if anything, his reaction at Kathleen's face confirmed that, not only is there definitely a banshee outside, but he's completely abandoned us. Seriously, just try and imagine being 7 years old, and that being your truth. We didn't calm down for hours. Mom and Dad say we were still up crying at 1 o'clock in the morning, with the whole incident going on at about 10. Even when we knew everything was okay, we just cried because it had been so bloody traumatic. Obviously, there was no banshee, and we didn't find this out until years later, for obvious reasons, but what we'd heard was the two sounds of foxes making love. As me and my sisters now know all too well, when they do that, the lady fox screeches at the top of her lungs, producing what is a rather unsettling and otherworldly sound. Kathleen, being the brave big sister he was, had run out to protect us. But maybe if she was as nimble as she was courageous, she wouldn't have run directly into that tree in her blind panic, almost knocking herself out in the process. The best she could do then was retrace her poor, befuzzled steps back to the Wendy house and pass out at the sight of her own blood. It's a story we tell every Christmas now, especially whenever there's a new boyfriend or husband making an appearance, and it always gets a giggle from those that hear it. But I think if you put a gun to my head and asked me for the scariest moment of my life, I'd say the banshee when I was 7. I'm deadly serious, scarier than childbirth, scarier than finding the lump in my breast, scarier than confronting my first husband about his drinking. Because I believed something I didn't understand was coming to get me, something mythical, something supernatural, something that even Dad was scared of. Needless to say, there were no more sleepovers in the Wendy house that summer, and the whole thing went assways and fell down a few years later. But me and my sisters will always have that story to make us laugh, even though at the time we were scared for our lives. For the past 2 years, my best friend, let's call her Kate, and I have spent a week at her Nana's house for a summer visit. For random info purposes, the first time I went we were both 16. Her Nana owns what used to be used as a community church, built in 1902 by Swedish immigrants. The main chapel is joined to a slightly more modern building, from the 1960s, that held offices and such, but now is used for living areas. It's really cool to visit. It's also really creepy. Kate had told me stories about how it's supposedly haunted and how her Nana hears weird things and the electricity gets weird. Her printer turns on randomly, lights go out, the radio turns on without warning, etc. The latter could be due to the building's age, but they had an electrician check it out a while back and said everything seems to be fine. I have always gone back and forth about whether supernatural things could be real, so it seemed interesting to me. Kate and I are both into that stuff, and we made plans to hang out in the chapel area, the creepiest place, late at night while we worked on making these tie blankets. First year. During the day, the chapel was peaceful and pretty. The stained glass windows were typical of an old church, and it was mostly natural, although it was unsettling to be in. You can hear a bit of daytime traffic from inside, but since Little Falls is a tiny town, there are hardly any cars outside the church at night. When I entered the chapel at night for the first time, it was creepy. It felt like we were constantly walking through spider webs, and our legs and arms kind of tingled. We were listening to the radio quietly and making the blankets on the floor when suddenly, we heard 5 or 6 crystal clear footsteps coming from the front of the chapel, where there is a stage. The floor inside is all wooden. From the initial hollow thump of the heel to the soft noise of the toes coming down, they were exceedingly realistic. We both looked at each other with completely startled faces. We heard them over the music, and it sounded like a man walking across the stage, even though there wasn't anyone there, and the entire room is filled with old stuff like furniture that her Nana is trying to sell. Kate asked me, "Did you hear that?" I replied with a yes, and we immediately started trying to figure out what it was. We went over to the newer area and found her Nana watching TV just as she had been for the past few hours. She had both of her small dogs inside with her, and she told us she had been there the whole time. She said that no one else was here. Kate and I talked about it a lot since. The only other weird thing I remember happening was the power completely turning off for about half an hour, but I think it was because we blew a fuse somehow. Second year. The first year was a lot of fun. We did other things than ghost hunting, so we planned to go again. We highly doubted that we would hear or see anything, and what we had experienced was a once-in-a-lifetime event. We considered the footsteps to be some sort of residual auditory phenomenon. However, the next time we went back, it seemed like things got worse. It was as if the more time we spent there, the more intense the paranormal things became. We went out in the chapel at about 9:30, just to see if anything else would happen. We were talking to ghosts and laughing at ourselves because we felt silly trying to pretend to be the people from Ghost Adventures. When the time passed and it was shortly after 10 o'clock, the entire place had a darker vibe. Even the light seemed dimmer, and the tingly spiderweb feeling was more bothersome. We heard 2 knocks near the back of the church. The exterior is made of brick, and the whole yard is fenced in so there wasn't anyone on the outside. The knocks sounded like they were on wood. We looked to the back corner to see wooden boards leaning against the wall. We decided to go to bed for the night after getting too scared. We were just a pair of 2 frightened 17-year-old girls, after all. We shared a king-sized mattress on the floor of her guest room. She's eclectic and owns a church as a home. She's kind of awesomely crazy and doesn't have proper furniture, but there was nothing wrong with the mattress on the floor to us. We each had our suitcases next to us. Kate and I were falling asleep after trying to laugh off what we heard just feet away from us. We were both about to drift off when, out of nowhere, we heard scratching. On canvas. It went one direction, the other direction, back, and back once more. 4 swipes. I'm providing so much detail because I can remember it so vividly, and I want to make it seem like you were with my friend and me. Kate said nervously, "What was that?" And I responded, "I don't know," and started to panic. For whatever reason, we both fell asleep right away, and I don't remember panicking for an entire minute after speaking before sleeping. The next morning, Kate tried mimicking the sound we both heard on her suitcase, and it was identical. The room is made of bricks, and the door was closed. There were no animals or other people inside. We spent the day outside walking around and sitting in the sun. We put sunscreen on our chest and face but not the rest of our body, so we expected to be burned later because we were too lazy to put it on our legs and such. 2 or 3 nights later, we were in the same situation. I fell asleep when I heard the tin of mints inside my purse next to me shake. Kate woke up to it, and I felt more frightened than I had been before. My purse was resting on my suitcase for hours, so it wasn't just adjusting, and the shaking was more like someone tilted it so the mint slid to one direction and then they slid back the other way. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night, and my mind kept playing tricks on me. I was seeing things, shadows and lights, but I credit that nearly fully to my sleepy state and wild, terrified imagination. We decided to leave the next morning. When I woke up, I was burned as expected everywhere on my body except for one place. On my left leg was a white handprint. With long, pointy fingers. I had been dating this girl and staying with her and her mother for a couple of months. She had a kind of witchy Wiccan type of vibe. She had a little altar and was always burning candles and doing spells and such. I hadn't been sleeping well for a few weeks and was usually up late playing Xbox downstairs in the living room. I started noticing little shadows running along the baseboards every night, and over a few days the intensity started to pick up. I honestly thought it might be mice as we lived in a relatively wooded area, but then I noticed them up towards the ceiling and other spots. I mentioned it one morning to my girlfriend. She said she had been reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead and was doing some sort of spell but didn't get into the details. She said it was probably something to do with that. She also mentioned how one of the workers had been killed by another when the house was being built. Consequently, there was allegedly a bloody stain somewhere on the foundation of the house. I honestly didn't think too much of it. My whole family has had paranormal encounters, including myself, so I figured just ignore it and eventually it will go away. A few weeks went by, and I was noticing the shadows less and less, so I had more or less forgotten about it. We were driving somewhere and happened to pass a huge military cemetery. We were about half a mile past it when I noticed shadowy forms kind of keeping pace with us. We were doing about 65 to 70, so I knew it wasn't any kind of animal running and there were multiples. Just weaving through the tree line, never really coming into full view. I turned to my girlfriend, and she was dead white, hands clenched in the steering wheel. I say, "Do you see that? What is that?" She just shakes her head and keeps driving, looking dead ahead. I'm getting kind of spooked at this point because I know she's not telling me something. Should also mention it's maybe 11 a.m. The sun is shining, not a cloud in the sky. Anyway, we run some errands, and we're coming back through a busy part of town. I see this old man headed in the opposite direction and asking really slowly. It's 90 degrees out, and he's wearing a long camel hair coat and a long houndstooth patterned scarf. He's also wearing a trillbilly hat, which is more or less a fedora with a floppy brim. I'm looking at this dude, and I turn and say, "Hey, check this guy out, he must be roasting." I see my girlfriend's face, and it's dead white again. She's just staring ahead, silently mouthing something. I look back, and I see the guy wandering into the street through traffic toward us. His head is low, and I can't see his face. I turn again to my girlfriend, kind of laughing like, "Yo, get your change ready." She turns to me and says, "Don't look at him. We're stuck at a light in midday traffic," and I'm like, "Child, he probably just wants $1." I look back, and he's right there, hand pressed against the back driver's side window. I look into where his face should be, and it's just a black void, 2 little points of round white for eyes, and just teeth hanging there in darkness. I bug out. "What is that? What the hell do you see that?" My girlfriend screams again, "Don't look at it," and guns it, swings the car into incoming traffic, and blows the light. The whole time I'm still trying to process what I saw. I'm screaming at her. "What the duck was that?" And she's just crying and saying, I'm sorry." I honestly don't remember a lot after that. I remember trying to talk to her about it, but she refused and said I must have just seen something. But I know she saw it too, and to this day I still can't explain it. It wasn't the usual Hatman encounter. This was a fully formed person. I've seen shadow entities quite a few times, so I know it wasn't that, but the Hatman was the closest thing I've heard of to explain it. Anyway, thanks for listening. Whatever it is, I need it dead. We live in Oregon, I live in downtown Portland proper, and my mom is out in the southern burbs. I spent a few nights visiting my childhood cats, strolling around my old neighborhood, and catching up with my old school friends. I work graveyard, so I'm awake most of the night. I smoke about 5 sticks a day, and I always prefer to walk while I smoke. On one of my smoking walks, I passed through a small nature trail not 2 blocks from my mom's. Minuscule is a nature area. You can stand on the street of this perfectly normal suburb and see the perfectly normal suburban street on the other side, maybe 50 feet away through the trees. This is less than an acre of land, bordered on every side with rows and rows of cookie-cutter townhouses, with a tin, winding, path trail passing through it. I've walked down this trail easily more than 10,000 times. I grew up in this town. I walked with my mom here when I was 3. I played with my friends here all through school. I cleaned up invasive species here for community service when I was a destructive teen. I know this place. I got maybe 10 feet past the light of the street lamps and into the dark of the path, and suddenly I'm awash with possibly the most intense feeling of dread I had ever felt. I used to come here at night when I was 11. This place has never frightened me, not once. Yet there I am. I chalk it up to the year or two it's been since I've been there, or the things I've seen since then, and push on after taking my earbuds out and listening close. The whole way through this intense dread, like something horrible is just moments from happening won't go away. I passed through the other end, tense as I've ever been in my life, and it began to dissipate. By the time I'm 30 feet out of the dark, it's completely gone, but I felt shaken and drained. I've been in knife fights, I've been chased by dogs, and I've been through some ducked up shit, and they were all traumatizing in their own ways, but never in my life had I felt such purified fear. No rationality, no discernible cause, just fear. I lit up another cigarette to mull it over and took the streets back. The next night, I'm on another of my night walks. I went towards the path, with the notion to prove to myself it was some strange fluke. I took one look at the edge of the dark, and every hair on my body stood on end. I saw nothing. I heard nothing. It was perfectly normal. I couldn't make a lick of sense out of it. I turned around and went back home, but unlike the day before, the fear nagged me the whole way. I kept instinctively looking back past my shoulder. I didn't know what was going on with me, but I felt weak and ashamed and told myself I needed to get my SHT together in the morning. I got home, finished up the video game I was playing, left it paused while I walked, for 20 minutes or so, and went to bed. My mom wakes me up at about 7 o'clock in the morning the next day. Our cat Gabriel had been killed in the night by some animal, and she couldn't bear to pick up the body, he was her favorite. She begs me to do it. I love my pets and take my stewardship of them very seriously. But I've also always had an iron will. I can suppress these things in the moment and unbottle them slowly over time. So out I go. I should mention that our cats can come and go as they please. We keep the garage door open a crack, but they never stray far from the house. Coyotes are everywhere in this day and age, but they don't come too close to the house generally. There he is, in the front yard. Right outside. I'm shocked the attack didn't wake me, as I'm as light of a sleeper as it gets. Asking my neighbors who are consoling my mom, I find out they heard all sorts of snarls and growls coming from our yard for a brief time the night previous. I realize he must have died while I was still awake with my headphones on. My shoulders swell with rage, and I plan how I'm going to hunt these coyotes in the back of my mind while I gather what is needed to clean him up. I'm picking the pieces of him up and putting the remains in a trash bag, and I realize I have his intact hind half and most of his internal organs, but his top half is scattered everywhere in the grass and his head is missing. Took it with them, I supposed at the time. Looking around the area for anything I missed, I noticed that there's a line of blood droplets leading away from the house. Once the grisly part is done, I have revenge on my mind. Decide to follow the blood trail and do some detective work. Mostly to have something else to focus on, in hindsight. I followed the blood droplets, it was steady all the way through. Consistent, in a way that was not as I would expect. It led straight to the trail. There's his head, dead center of the trail, right inside the entrance. Looking right at me. No surrounding blood. I remember feeling like it looked eerily staged. When I picked up his head, his heart fell out of his mouth. A moment or two to process what I was looking at, then pricks launched up my spine again, and I felt it. That being hunted feeling from before, but much worse. Because that time I knew it wasn't just a crossed wire in my brain. Whatever I was sensing was a real and tangible threat. I gathered his bits and stalked home, fuming with anger and disbelief and a kind of fear I had never experienced. I buried him in the backyard and smoked 2 packs that day. This was about 3 months ago now. My mom doesn't let the cats out anymore. I haven't been back to visit. In my mind I know it's impossible. It has to be some freaking coincidence that the remains ended up like that. The coyotes thought they'd need more food but ran into more prey on the way back. But why was his heart not only in his mouth but intact? Why was there so little blood around his head? How was the blood trail so consistent with nothing but his head and his heart? There are so many aspects I can chalk up to coincidence and paranoia. But there are so many that just will not add up, no matter how hard I try to rationalize it. It's been weighing on my mind fiercely, and I worry about the safety of my mom's other pets. I want to know what it is, so I can kill it. I know this isn't much info to go on, but I tried to be as detailed as possible. I would greatly appreciate any assistance you can provide. For the first time in years, my family started to believe me when I said that something was going on in our apartment or property. I have a connection to the paranormal since my grandmother passed away almost 10 years ago, as I felt someone sitting down on my bed at night, and when I opened my eyes, no one was there. Since then I had small incidents happen, like things being moved after leaving the apartment and coming back hours later. We have a security system with alarms and cameras, so it couldn't be an intruder. About 3 years ago, I started seeing spirits. It started out with a lady in white flared pants in our garden during the early evening hours. Then a little boy in a sailor's outfit was added to the mix. He'd start out by standing in the doorway of my room, just peeking in during the evening or night. Eventually he'd pull on my sleeves or hair when I wasn't paying attention to him. He also had the tendency to play with the lights. I've also seen a man with a black hat running past the living room windows a couple times. None of these spirits had a harmful presence. In fact, I liked them here. I had a portal in my room due to 2 mirrors facing each other, which I closed a couple months ago, and since then I haven't seen any of them. Now let's get to the real problem. We have an extremely old and heavy wooden door as a garden entrance. You have to put a lot of weight into it when you want to open and close it. It has a very specific, long, and loud sound. No other door in our property's range sounds like that. 5 months ago, I started hearing that exact sound. I looked outside, but no one came in. This happened several times a day for weeks. My parents have never heard it happen and genuinely thought I was becoming schizophrenic. Up until 2 months ago. They finally heard it too. That was when we put up 2 cameras. Nothing is captured on the cameras whenever we hear that sound. No sound, no figure. Nothing. Then we thought we're all going crazy until our dog started barking a couple seconds before we'd hear that sound. And that's when weird things started going on with my dog involved. I'd clearly hear him walk into my room, his claws on the wooden flooring, while he was out with my parents. His food bowl would randomly be full. He'd walk past me to one side of the apartment, although I found him asleep on the completely different side of the apartment without him walking past me for a second time. But here's the last straw. Every single creepy thing had stopped a month ago when my ex-partner broke up with me. Nothing has happened since then. He has no connection to the paranormal and doesn't believe in it. And those things started before I even knew him. Was it a mimic? Was it a guardian angel warning me? I am utterly confused and genuinely need answers and help. I have always felt the Minnehaha Falls were haunted, but now I know. So I have gone to the falls as a teen a lot. This place is not uncommon if you are from Minneapolis. A lot of people who see it during the day like to go and play in the river and walk down the paths and go down to the Mississippi. Not many people, but somehow a lot of people go down there at night. For many reasons. Graffiti, smoking, and drinking. All sorts of reasons. It is a lot of fun down there. I was in a previous relationship where the guy didn't like to get out much at night, so I did not have a chance to go down to the falls for a long time, at night if at all. So I did not know I would feel this way when I went down there. My new boyfriend is down for anything. So we went down to the falls, and we hung out by the actual falls for about 20 minutes at 10 p.m., and all was okay. I knew someone was watching. He felt kind of lonely and sad, but friendly, so I didn't mind it. We decided it would be a good idea to walk down the Mississippi, because I wanted my boyfriend to see the stars and how pretty it was, but I did not want to walk the way that I felt the lonely soul, so we went up the stairs to Deer Park and walked down to the river that way. Not a good idea. We went down there, and Deer Park was sort of open, but it was not clear of ghosts. But I somehow knew that they were not paying any mind to us at all, so we went forward down to the river. I had no reason to turn back besides the feeling that I knew the spirits were at war with themselves. Which was odd, because usually they all look at me if I am in a place where I can sense them. But I digress. We walked down to the wooded path where we would walk to the river. Now this is where things get weird. I felt someone on the other side of the creek looking at us. But I am used to this because before, I would always feel this feeling of someone watching. But this time I felt the eyes at hatred, and they were not very friendly. Not that they ever were, but this time it was more of a "why are you trespassing on my land" sort of thing. It was sort of harsh. But in spite of this, I still wanted my boyfriend to have a good time, and I didn't want him to know that I was scared, so I continued on with our walk. There are 3 bridges we pass on the way to the river from where we were walking. 2 on the ground and 1 overhead. We passed the first one on the ground, and about a minute after that is when my feelings started to worsen. But not only with the man over on the other side of the creek, but right in front of me. Which I have never felt there in my life, but as I said before, as I get older, it is easier to tell these things. So as I was saying, it was about a minute after I passed the first bridge that I saw a man walking towards me. He knows I can see him, and he knows I can feel him. But he does not look at me. He just keeps walking past and doesn't look at me. This is the first time in my life that I have not seen a spirit in my mind. It is right in front of me. He is not aware that he is not alive, it seemed like. He just walks patrol, it feels like. But he was not happy. I couldn't get a clear feeling of what he was feeling, but I know he was not happy. Knowing this, I keep walking because it was only one, and there was one on the other side. So as long as they were not near and did not want to bother me and my boyfriend, I was okay with that. The feeling just scared the living shit out of me. So as we keep walking, I see another spirit. The second was a little bit more frantic. It didn't scare me as much as the other two, though. Which was weird, being that it seemed as though he was being chased. I did not see what was chasing him, but he was clearly running in fear for his life. I feel like this may have been how he died, being that he was running so fast and the look on his face was clear, but it was a shadow. I could almost hear his screaming. But they weren't screams. More like he was hollering. He wasn't saying anything. Just hollering. At this point, I wanted to nope the duck out of there. But as I said before, I didn't want to frighten my boyfriend, so I kept walking. The next time I see another ghost, we are past the third bridge and almost to the river. This is the third one I have seen, and this one wasn't sure if I could see him, because I looked at him, but made it look like I could see right through him. That is what I normally do with spirits, as to not attract any attention to myself by them. I fear being followed, and that is not something I want. I could tell he wanted to speak to me, but being that he wasn't sure if I could see him, he didn't say anything. Which is awesome. Normally I can get all sorts of signals and sometimes questions that I have to ignore, but he wasn't foolish, nor was he frightened. He was just there. Like he knew he was dead, but he didn't know how to get to the other side. I knew he looked right at me, and he was walking right in front of me as I walked to the left and to the right as if trying to stop me as I got closer to him. This one was confusing me a little bit. I had no idea what to expect as I got closer and closer, but when he got close enough, I avoided the shadow and walked on without looking back as if I never saw him at all. He felt disappointed as I passed in the realization that maybe I could not see him after all. So we get down to the river, and all is fine, and I feel safer than I did before, but not quite out of the woods yet, metaphorically speaking, not literally. We get down there and it is dark and it was cloudy over the river, so I was disappointed, but I still wanted to have a good time, so I walk out of the wooded area and start to talk to my boyfriend about the river and how pretty it usually is at night and how I've been down there before and how the river was so high once, I couldn't walk down there. After I say this, my boyfriend stops me, and he points to the shore and tells me he thinks that people are down there, and I saw no one. So I told him he was just seeing things and that they were rocks, not people. But he swears they are actually people. No, they aren't. They are rocks. Which they were. Then he tells me that he wants to get out of there, and I persist in going down there because I did not walk that way and pass 3 ghosts for nothing. I was scared. But I know spirits cannot hurt me. They just frighten you. But then he says something, and it makes me think that he can feel the spirits, too. I take this chance to nope the duck out of there at this point. So we walk back, passing all 3 bridges with nothing happening but the spirit on the other side watching us and the spirit on before the second bridge doing his patrol thing. We get to Deer Park, and everything has settled down from when we were last there about 40 minutes before. Just what felt like spirits sitting and looking. We get up the stairs and the rest of the night, where there are lights, and we sit by a fountain and talk for 20 to 30 minutes, and then we leave. He told me that he did not want me to bring him to a place where I did not feel safe again. But it wasn't that I didn't feel safe. These spirits terrified me. I explained to him what I saw as we went down there and what I felt. He thought I meant that I felt there were people down there and that I was afraid we were going to get mugged. Turns out, the entire way we walked down there, he said he had goosebumps, but he didn't want to say anything. He said that sometimes he can feel something in the room that isn't there, but he can't see anything. So this confirms that I am not crazy and that I wasn't just seeing things. This is by far the most frightened, and not only that, but it is also the first time I have clearly seen anything physically in front of me. Usually they are just in my head, speaking to me and asking me things, or in my dreams. I have never felt this, but it excites me, sort of. I've never shared my experiences, and they might not seem frightening to you. I hope it at least sparks up some questions, but when you're right in front of something you can't explain, it would make anyone run for the hills like a bat out of hell. I just never ran because I'd become so numb from the fear. I lived in a beautiful home, which I still own, will say, in Valencia, California, for anonymity reasons. It was a big home on a huge lot. My home isn't too old, it was built in 1940. I lived there with my husband, 3 sons ages 8, 11, and 13, and their dog. I had a treadmill that was nicely folded in the corner of the den facing the wall, and every time I passed by the den to go to the laundry room, I'd look at it and say to myself, I gotta make time. I was always on the go, and I never had time for me. If you're a parent or you come from a family always involved in sports with their kids, you know what I mean. Then one day I said, forget that I'm going to do our daily pickups at the park for the kids, cook dinner, do homework, put a load to wash, feed these guys, and even if it's 10 p.m., I'm going to get on that succubus tonight. And that's exactly what I did. I took care of everyone, and then I took out that pin on the side of the treadmill and turned it on. I wasn't too happy that the treadmill was facing the wall, but if I had my husband turn it around, it may take too long, and I wasn't going to do that. So, before I got on that treadmill, I ran to each one of my kids, including my husband, and I told them that for the next 20 minutes, no one was to call me for anything. They all understood, and I ran to start my workout. I put on my headphones, turned on my music, and began feeling the music flow, and I began to walk. I was feeling good and so proud of myself, and I turned up the volume to completely drown out all the happenings, if any, in my home. I listened to one song, then the next song came on, and it was Beyoncé's Love on Top, my favorite. I was pumped up and feeling great. Then, out of nowhere, I stared to hear a chorus of screams coming out of the song that I was listening to. I thought it must be an interference, so I paused the song for a bit then started to play it again. About a minute later, these vicious and frustrated screams, all in different pitches and tones, pierced my ears. I looked back, still walking on my treadmill, because I thought, my kids are fighting, and if I get off this machine, they're going to get it. I continued, but the same yelling persisted, so I paused the treadmill and the music, got off, and walked to my kids' room, ready to tell them all off, but when I got to the first room, my younger kids, surprisingly, were playing with their G.I. Joes. I said, who in the hell is fighting here? They looked at me like I was a violent woman, and they responded that it wasn't them. I stared at them for a bit, not believing them because I knew I heard some yelling, like someone was angry and fighting. So I stood by the door for a few seconds looking at them while they ignored me, and I turned around, closed the door, and walked back to the treadmill. I get back on the treadmill, start the damn thing up again, turn on the music, this time it was a totally different song, and after a few minutes, cries and yelling began up again. I thought, if it wasn't the kids and it can't be my phone, then what the heck? I continued walking, ignoring the screams, but it just got louder and more violent. I kept walking, and I began to really listen to the screams and cries of what sounded like so many people angry and wailing at the same time. I began to feel something behind me, getting closer. Now you know something's up when your heart starts to beat faster all on its own, the air gets thicker. I can't explain this sensation, but your body is telling you it feels like something that's just not right. This only happened after I was really listening to the screams in the background, trying to see what the heck it could be. The energy began to feel heavy and very electrically charged. I felt this energy on my back, like it was standing right behind me. I didn't know what the hell to do because my husband was in the room watching TV and my kids were in their rooms, so there was no one to call out to nearby. I knew something was there, but I continued to walk, still listening to the screaming, piercing cries in my ears like if I wasn't experiencing a damn thing. Finally, when I couldn't handle the growing feeling that something horribly wrong was about to happen, I calmly, and I did this because I knew if I freaked out, whatever was on me would prey on my fear, and I would encounter something that I wouldn't be able to shake. So I calmly paused the treadmill and grabbed my phone. I never paused the music because I was too scared to listen to the complete silence in the room. I turned around, ready to step off the treadmill, and I can now feel the heaviness of the air, stagnant, right on my face, inches away from what felt like my soul because I felt my insides quiver, like when you're so cold, but you're not cold and your body's shaking from the inside out. I stepped off the treadmill, walked to open the French doors that led into the now dark living room, and whatever I felt was now hovering over me. I still have the music going on, and the screams are still as violent as before. I start going into the hallway towards my room, and by that time I can't take it anymore, my brain's flipping out, and I start to chant the only words I could think of spoken to me by a good friend. The blood of Jesus protects me, the blood of Jesus protects me. By the third time I said these words, I felt this strong gravity pull me from the top of my head. I almost felt like I was going to be elevated because it was such a strong pull, but whatever was following me tore itself from me. That's how it felt, like it tore itself from my energy, and my body stopped shaking uncontrollably. A few feet away from where this thing, because it was neither a male nor female, dislodged itself from me, was the door to my bedroom. I walked in, and I didn't tell my husband what had happened because he didn't believe in any of this stuff, so I just changed into my pajamas and watched TV in bed until I fell asleep. Ghost or demonic entity? Could use advice. So basically, since I've moved into my apartment complex, 3 years ago, I've been experiencing paranormal activity that I've decided to name Bill. Please don't judge me, it's just a way to make the whole ordeal feel less frightening than it is. In the first few months there, I was experiencing things like hearing someone breathing behind me at night while in bed or in the bathroom and seeing tall figures in the hallway or in my dad's room. I live with him. Bill might also be following me, because in my time living here I've also been to 2 different psych wards for unrelated personal reasons. At the wards, I also experienced paranormal activity. Seeing tall figures in the hallways or running past a window. The same night that happened, another patient I knew was getting medicine and saw a tall figure on the roof, and feeling like I was being watched or like something in my room was going to jump me. He's still here after I got released from the psych ward, obviously, because otherwise I probably wouldn't be sharing this. Whenever I'm home alone, I keep hearing things like knocking and scratching on the walls and that same feeling of being about to be jumped from behind. Things have also gone missing, like water bottles that were on my desk but gone the next day. Things like the shower or sink turning on their own have also happened, though to be fair, that's more annoying than scary if you take into account the water bills. I've also been getting touched in random places, like on my arms and legs, or feeling a head laying against my side. That happened just last night. I know this all might seem a bit ridiculous, especially considering I named him, but I could really just use some advice on the matter. I've already talked to a friend who's more experienced with spiritual things, and they're convinced I'm dealing with a nuisance of a demon, but I wanted some outsider opinions on the matter. The Creeper of Rountree Park, Haunted Forest Experiences. I grew up with my grandparents in Falls Church, and our house was only a few hundred yards from Rountree Park. I used to always play in the woods as a child, alone or with friends, and never had any issues. I loved the outdoors and explored that woods thoroughly. However, I would never stay out after dark, of course. My mother grew up here as well and would always tell stories about the woods and believed they were haunted. She said plenty of creepy things happen with her. For instance, when she was younger, they had 2 family labs. They were super friendly, and my mother and uncles would walk them through the woods all the time. One time, my mother was walking alone with the dogs around dusk when she came across what she describes as a ripped-off deer haunch lying covered in blood in the middle of a trail. There were no other deer parts, bodies, or blood anywhere to be seen, just this random, bloody leg. She described it as having the appearance of being ripped off. Definitely not cut. Obviously freaked out, she took the dogs and just started heading home. All of a sudden, near the exit of the park, the dogs completely froze in their tracks and just started growling into the tree line. This was very unlike them, as they were super friendly with both people and other animals, were quite large, and never feared anything. However, as my mother kept trying to pull them along and see what they were growling out, their tails went between their legs, and they started whimpering, refusing to move forward. It was then my mom said she saw a large, almost 8-foot dark figure with glowing red eyes move between the trees, staring right at her. She immediately turned around with the dogs and fled, taking a different exit out of the woods. My uncle has also said he's seen the red-eyed giant before, but never a clear view, always a silhouette. Keep in mind there are no bears or anything of the sort around here that would do that to a deer. On another occasion some years later, my mom recalled walking with our then golden retriever near the woods. Again, the retriever was the sweetest dog in the world and loved everybody. But my mom came across an old, creepy lady feeding and talking quietly to some wild rabbits on one of the sidewalks/trail. Immediately our dog started growling at the woman, something my mother has never heard her do before. My mom immediately apologized to the lady and walked around her with her dog, tugging her along. As she continued to walk, she came across a circle of rabbits all standing perfectly still and just staring at her. This actually happened on Slade Run Drive, and a few months back my girlfriend witnessed the same exact thing driving to my grandparents' house. My mother and uncles have other stories, but I always thought they were full of it, either just imagining things or making them up to scare me, since I've played in those woods so many times and never had any issues. However, my older brother used to go on nightly walks through the woods, and he told me he'd seen the red-eyed monster and other mysterious creepy encounters. I was around 15 or 16 at the time and loved ghost stories and never encountered anything like that, so I was able to convince him to go out ghost hunting with me. Of course, I thought it was all a bunch of silly BS anyway. The first time we went out, we had a few friends over. We were hanging out late at night, hanging out and telling ghost stories. Of course, we mentioned the haunted forest. We were living at a house down the street from our grandparents at the time, so still practically next door to the woods. My friends all thought it'd be fun if we went out into the forest to search for some ghosts and monsters and have a good laugh. We waited until it was about 2 to 2:30 a.m. and headed out. There was a fairly large group of us, maybe 6 to 8 people total, including my brother and myself. As we're walking through this pitch black forest using our phones as flashlights, I kid you not, all phones turned off at the same time. Of course the girls in our group started freaking out, and to be honest, I'm pretty sure we all did, but we were also kind of laughing at the nonsense of it all. There was no noise anywhere other than us, the forest was completely dead silent, and after a few minutes everyone was able to get their phones turned on and working again. We decided to head home at that point. It could have been a freak accident, I'm not really sure. The second time I went with my brother and a couple of other friends, this time a much smaller crew, I think maybe 3 or 4 of us all together. Same as before, we'd thought it'd be fun and silly to go out ghost hunting at night and see my brother's little Sasquatch friend. This time was different, however. The moment we entered the forest, things got weird. The forest felt unnaturally dark, and our lights barely reached the tree line on either side. We brought flashlights this time. We also immediately felt a large sense of dread, danger, and adrenaline, and like we were being watched from all sides. Quite frankly, it was terrifying, as only moments before we were joking and laughing and telling ghost stories, but we all immediately shut up and felt it not even 30 yards from the road/entrance to the forest. Whatever, we continued slowly walking deeper into the woods, talking and nervously laughing as we peered about with our flashlights. The forest was dead silent when suddenly, all at once, we heard what sounded like what can only be described as several thousand monkeys screaming and screeching at us from the treetops and tree lines in all directions, all around us. The noise was overwhelmingly loud and deafening. I've never heard anything like it, or since. It's hard to describe, but angry, hateful monkeys all crying out in anger at us is the best way to describe it. And those cries were definitely targeted at us. The sense of danger and dread immediately jumped to 11, and we wasted no time in turning tail and sprinting for the forest exit, the sounds of 1,000 lost souls screaming incredibly loud chasing us from above and around. Obviously, we saw no animals or anything in the trees or around us when flashing our lights up and about, but we're also more preoccupied with getting the heck out of there. Like I said, we were only perhaps a few hundred feet from the entrance of the forest, so it took no time at all to get out. The moment we stepped out of the forest and into the light of a nearby street lamp, the forest fell dead quiet. Not a rustle, not a whisper. For those of you wondering, there are not any wild monkeys in these woods, lol. Nor anything else I could think of that would make those sounds. But they were loud. And obviously terrifying. The third and final time I worked up the courage to go ghost hunting and find these evil little monkey things once and for all, sealed the deal with me. I will never forget what happened on that night. A few months or perhaps a year or so after our encounter with the angry monkeys, I was still upset that I had never encountered the red-eyed Sasquatch thing and convinced myself that the prior experience was probably just some rabid foxes or something. It wasn't. My older brother agreed to go out into the woods one last time with me, as he didn't really fear anything, and to be honest, neither did I. I was some edgy 15 or 16-year-old anyway. This time if I heard them yelling at me, I was just going to yell at them back and demand they show themselves. Or something. I just wanted to prove to myself that night really happened and I wasn't just crazy. The setting was perfect, a full moon, and it was about to hit 2 a.m. My brother brought a couple of knives and throwing knives, and I brought a large quarterstaff. I had black belt training in bow staff from my childhood. We set out on our little adventure. From the very start, things were different from our previous encounter for the better. There were no unnatural feelings of being watched, no sense of fear or dread, no sense of panic. We walked all through the woods, sticking to the major paths. The occasional cricket chirp and the sounds of the nearby creek flowing downriver were the only noises we heard. At one point, a bush I was walking past bristled, and something fled away, causing me to almost pee myself, but I figured it was probably a raccoon or fox or something that we had spooked. After about an hour of pointlessly walking around, we decided to pack it in. As we started heading back home, my brother would occasionally stop in the path and begin listening intensely. For what, I didn't know, as I heard nothing around us. He just said he thought he heard something. A few minutes later, he stopped and grabbed my arm tightly. I looked up at him and asked what the big idea was, as we were almost out of the forest and I just wanted to get home at this point. He quickly hushed me and told me to shut up, so I did. Then he whispered that someone was following us, though he never once turned around or anything. At that precise moment, I caught the worst goosebumps of my life and felt the presence staring at us from behind. I very slowly began to turn and look behind us. As I did, I saw a shadow or silhouette, literally creeping up behind us. The best way to describe what I saw was a large, 8+ foot figure with glowing red eyes, silently walking down the path toward us. Once it saw that I had seen it, it immediately crouched low and dashed straight out of the path and into the tree line, at a full sprint but without making a noise, and straight at us. I remember just yelling at my brother, "Run!" And we freaking ran. The thing is, this thing started chasing us. I had never felt more danger, More raw hate emanating from someone or something before. I knew it was going to harm us. And we were sprinting for our very lives through this maze of a forest. And it chased us the entire way, just barely behind us. It must have been going fast to keep up, because we were really booking it. I never turned around, nor did my brother, for that would have slowed us down even a tiny bit, but we didn't have to as we sensed it closing in. I could feel it reaching out to grab me by my neck/collar, just inches keeping myself from it as I ran for dear life. At this point we could also hear it clearly kicking up the gravel and dirt just inches behind us as it ran after us. Knowing there was no way we'd make it to the proper exit in time, I yelled at my brother to follow me off the main path and through a small hidden trail that I knew from my young childhood. Gloriously, we burst out of the forest and into the lighted lawn of what used to be my best friend's backyard. As soon as we got out of the forest and into the lights of the yard, we immediately stopped and turned to face our attacker. But it just stood there, just out of light and in the tree line, menacingly glaring at us with hatred and animosity. I never got a good view of it, not like I had when I first saw it on the trail creeping up on us, but I could sense it was there and almost barely see a large, almost 8-foot figure/shadow moving amongst the tree line staring us down. Full of adrenaline, I yelled at it to come out into the light and fight. Instead of creeping about, I had my staff out in front of me, and my brother had a knife in each hand, and we were prepared to defend ourselves. Suddenly something hit me in the chest, stammered. I looked down to see a few pieces of gravel from the main path we were on earlier standing at my feet. It threw it at me. My brother saw it too and immediately threw one of his knives into the forest from where the rocks came, and we turned and ran home. My other brother later told me that when he was about 11 or 12, and walking through the woods at night with his best friend, something started throwing gravel stones at them too from the tree lines. We've never been back at those woods since, and I will never be caught in them past dusk if I ever go at all. I don't know if it was an angry hobo or something living out in the woods or what, but from memory the best I can describe what I saw was a very large man figure, walking/creeping quietly up on us, and once it saw that I had noticed it, it hunched down low and sprinted silently into the tree line straight for us. I have never felt such danger or hatred in my entire life. I know for a fact that whoever or whatever it was, it meant to do us great harm. I've since heard stories of crawlers and other such things, and perhaps this was an example of one, I don't know. But my brother swears on his life that he didn't set that up to scare us or have anything to do with what happened, and that he was just as terrified as I was at the time. Oh, and he never did find his throwing knife, he actually went back to look for it in the morning. Unfortunately, my brother never got to see it. He said he heard and sensed it following us, but he never got a view of the creeper. Anyway, I don't know what the deal is with that forest, but I highly recommend everyone stay far away from it at night. I'd what I saw that night, but I've always just referred to it simply as the creeper. And yes, it did have the red, glowing eyes. After some research, it turns out other locals have heard the shrieks too, seen ghosts, and have had their phones and electronics turn off randomly, and one guy even supposedly came across a coven of 3 small cabins deep in the forest about 2 miles off any trails, and saw a witch. What do you guys think it could have been? Have any of you had similar encounters? Let me know in the comments. Mirror entity turned out to be a succubus. Encounter 1. One of the biggest experiences of my life was when I had just moved into my first apartment with my partner. We didn't have a lot of money, and it was this set of 5 single-level units that were impossibly small. From my past experiences, I learned that I always hear it coming before I see it. It's as if all of the noise around, the cars driving past, the stereo playing, the chirp of birds or crickets, the TV, whatever it is, will be turned up. It's normal volume 1 second, and then it feels like my head is full of the sound. Like a volume knob on my head has been put on full blast. I'll think, oh no, it's too loud, everything is too loud. This is always what I think. In this case, I'm cleaning up the little apartment. There are 2 small bedrooms, a living room/kitchen, the bathroom, and then the teeny tiny toilet room connected to the laundry. It's all seen from the front door, so you can imagine the size. I'm zipping around with some music on the stereo. The stereo is sitting in the back corner of the bedroom. I walk out of that room and go toward the kitchen counter and start wiping it down. Volume turns up in my head. I stop immediately and start the little chant in my head, it's too loud, this is too loud, and drop the rag I'm using, and I walk into the bedroom to turn the stereo down. I lean down to touch the knob, but everything slows down. It's like slow motion and then stopping. My hand is there hovering just before the knob, and all of a sudden I'm in 2 places. It's like I'm floating in the corner of the room while I'm still leaning down to grab that dial. There are mirrors behind me on the wall. They're my vanity table mirrors, and I see a woman in them. She has crazy hair, like she's mentally insane. It's black, and so are her eyes. She has the most furious look on her face. Like I'm the most vile thing in the world, and I've taken something from her. She has on this tattered little shift dress and is carrying a massive knife. It's raised and stabbing in a downward motion, toward my back. This woman intends to kill me. The amount of fear coursing through me at this point is immense. All of a sudden, everything snaps back. I'm back in my body, and the first thing I do is pivot around, placing my hands over my face. I do this so fast that after my pivot I actually fall backward onto my butt. My hands are shaking in front of my eyes, and I'm pulling that dumb look that everyone pulls when devastatingly frightened. I slowly move my hands from covering my eyes, and no one is there. I'm alone and shaking. I immediately turn off the music and walk out into the living room. I think to myself, okay, no more going in that room. And just sat in the living room terrified until my partner returned home. Encounter 2. It's Christmas holidays in 2014, and I'm on a strict sleep schedule. My partner is staying up late and enjoying the freedom to play games into the wee hours of the morning, and I'm going to bed at around 9 o'clock. I eventually fall asleep and seem to wake up in the dream. In other words, a lucid dream. As I'm waking up into the dream, I seem to be looking down, my eyes are blinking open slowly, and it's daytime. I am sitting cross-legged, and the wooden floors are light-colored, probably pine wood. My head is down, and as I'm waking up more, I notice that someone is sitting in front of me. It's a woman, I can see her legs crossed just like mine, our knees are almost touching. She has gorgeous skin, it just exudes this healthy glow. I continue lifting my head to see she has shoulder-length black hair that is impossibly shiny and straight, although something is wrong. Her eyes are entirely black, no whites at all, and she is looking at me like a predator would. I realize that she's holding in her right hand a chef's knife. It's enormous and almost decorative looking, with some kind of scroll work on the handle. Suddenly she lunges at me, slashing the knife, and I roll backward with her, and we begin wrestling. I don't want to fight you. Why are you doing this? But for some reason there is this feeling that she does not have a lot of power to actually hurt me. I get the sense that I have a lot more energy than her. I run away through the house and find some stairs. I dash up those and come into a loft-style living room. To put some distance between us, I go to the far end of the room and stand behind the coffee table. I'm facing the stairs, knowing she'll appear soon, and she does. She's stalking toward me slowly, and still my thoughts are completely benign. Who are you? Why do you want to fight me? I keep thinking these things when suddenly I'm transported to what looks like a hospital. There are people milling about in the large, waiting room-esque space, and I'm just as confused as when this whole dream first started. I'm trying to blend in a bit, but clearly I'm more vibrant than these people. They all look sick, and like zombies, they're bumping into each other lightly and continuing in whatever direction doesn't impede their movement. Their eyes are half-lidded, as if they don't even have the strength to hold them open completely. There's a large island in the middle of this room, and I continue moving backward, slowly rounding it, trying to remain unnoticed. Suddenly, a man in front of me lifts his head slightly. It's not as if he's heard me or seen me, it looks like he can smell me. Immediately his unfocused movements become focused, and he is walking directly toward me, bumping into anyone in his way and continuing forward. Side note, in an effort to remove the feeling of fear when I'm alone in the dark in my waking life, I've used a technique I read about back when I was living in the first apartment where Encounter 1 happened. It's one where you imagine a golden light starting from within you, right below your breastbone and above your navel. Usually I imagine it expanding until it surrounds me, and I imagine it burns away the fear, and if anything is purposefully causing the fear, it burns them if they're touched by it. The thought of that technique pops into my head, and I imagine the same light, but instead of expanding out in all directions, I imagine it expanding forward, toward this man and whatever scent he has picked up. He stops suddenly and resumes milling about like all the others. I think I'm safe when I see a woman's head raise, just like the man's did. In the exact same manner, she moves forward in a focused line toward me. I panic for a second until I imagine the same golden light burning away the connection, and she stops too. Right after this, a commotion erupts in the room. If this was a waiting room, there is a windowless frame where the staff would sit. People are barreling through this opening, and they are all dressed in similar clothing to the patients. All of the patients are running, trying to get away from these invaders. I can hear screaming as the invaders must be attacking the other patients. I'm shocked and just watching all of this when I see one last person sort of perched in the opening. He's got a gray cast to his skin, dark eyes, dark hair, and most frightening of all, he has what looks like black tar coming from his mouth. He's hissing violently, and the tar is spewing out of his mouth and down his front. I run. As I'm running down the corridors, I notice how big this place must be. There are huge pillars along the middle of the hallways, and I think I better hide, so I jump behind one. I'm deathly afraid of anything that might find me. My anxiety is through the roof when it's like an electric shock runs through me and I'm awake. I sit up in bed panting, sweating. The shock of waking up so suddenly has me a little bug-eyed as well. I decide that going to get a hug from my partner is probably the only thing that will make me feel better from such a scary dream when I notice that there isn't any sound coming from the computer room. I listen and hear, no typing, no talking, no mouse clicking. This can only mean one thing: he's doing IT after I told him he shouldn't. Realization. Oh my god, that woman in the dream. She's the same woman from before, the knife, the other apartment. As a younger woman, I was extremely jealous, and other women weren't the only enemies, porn was too. I had eradicated all of it in my partner's possession with no mercy whatsoever. He never did it without it, so essentially only I could be the one to give him pleasure. He had taken to hiding it in different cases, in different areas, under different titles, but I always found it and subsequently destroyed it. Later, I became much more understanding. This was when I had the first encounter. That apartment, that time, that woman. Skip to Christmas holidays, and he has 2 weeks off. In the first week he had told me that he was horny, but I was on my strict schedule and almost asleep when he asked. I told him to just do it yourself, we'll have sex in a couple days. His libido isn't very high in comparison to mine, so I didn't think it would be a big deal at all. I would notice little things like tissues on his desk in the next few days. I spoke to him about it and asked why he was doing IT so often. He said, I don't know, it's weird. It's like I don't even have the desire to, but I do it just before I come to bed, just so I can sleep better or something. I chided him a bit and told him that I know his libido and, like a car running out of petrol, he should stop abusing himself by overusing. He said okay and that he would stop since he doesn't really care about it while he's doing it anyway. That was what I said to him before I slept that night, before the dream I had. That was when she came to me, and maybe that was why she was so healthy? The morning after this dream, I'm in the kitchen making something to eat, and he comes in after just waking up. I had the weirdest dream last night. A woman with black hair was trying to have sex with me, but she didn't say a word to me, she just pushed her body up against mine really hard over and over. I kept telling her, no. But she seems so strong for her size. So there you have it. I believe she is a succubus, and I think maybe those other patients in that hospital and waiting room are like she was when I saw her the first time. Maybe there are other dimensions of existence? I think that woman tried to take me to a place of her own design and somehow get me to stop messing with her relationship with my partner. Is there something following me? My first weird encounter happened when I was in elementary school. I can't remember what grade specifically, but I was definitely young. My older brother, we will call him Jay, and I invited our neighbors Mike and Pay over for a Friday sleepover. My parents ended up hitting the hay earlier, around 9 p.m., so the four of us decided to take advantage of the mainly unoccupied house and play a good old game of hide and seek in the dark. For reference, I used to live in a one-story house that was built in the 70s, so the windows were really low and easy to look through if you tried to. My window in my bedroom was positioned on the side of the house, diagonal from a pesky street light that always seemed to perfectly shine into my window every single night. I didn't own curtains, but I did have blinds on my window, and I always kept them shut to try and help block out some of the light. Anyway, it was Mike's turn to count, my brother Jay, Pay, and I all decided to hide. I ended up shoving myself into my crowded and messy closet, which had one of those big folding doors. Because of the fact that my closet had 1,000,001 things in it and I didn't fit very well, the door wasn't able to fully shut. At the time, I really didn't mind, though, because it gave me a little slit between the door that I could peek through. 1 minute turned into 5 when everyone eventually got found, aside from me. Mike was starting to grow impatient, so he asked Jay and Pay to help him find me. That's when Pay, like the genius she is, ended up flinging my closet door open with an accomplished grin on her face. I don't remember much, other than me complaining that she was cheating, before my eyes drifted past her head and toward my bedroom window behind her. I remember my blood ran cold. The silhouette of a man with a hand literally cupped to the window, as if he were trying to peek in, was enough to scare the ever-loving shit out of me. I screamed a blood-curdling scream, which only caused Pay to turn on her heels to try and see what had me so frightened. It took all but 3 mere seconds before her screams joined mine, and we both gripped onto each other and full-on sprinted into the living room. I nearly stumbled into my older brother's hands while my parents raced out of the bedroom. I ended up explaining to them through choked tears that there was a man outside my window. My older brother and stepdad grabbed a flashlight and knife, and checked every perimeter outside, They even went as far as checking our surrounding neighbors' backyards and down the street. There was nothing, nobody. Literally, dead quiet. And, just to add as a side note, I remember very clearly that it was downpouring rain that night, so it would be incredibly hard for anyone to escape quickly without leaving sunken footsteps in the mud and without the sound of heavy shoes slapping against wet earth. Fast forward many, many years. At this point, I'm 19 years old, and I end up moving in with my girlfriend and her family. Just to add in, I know it doesn't typically mean much, but the feeling of being watched and always having unknown company hovering behind me has been a feeling that I've felt for over a decade now. Sometimes, I feel like it's all just in my head and I'm psyching myself out. Other times, the feeling just feels so damn real. Like I can't shake it, like my body is trying to alert me that I'm not alone, and the more I ignore my body and its warnings, the louder it screams. Anyway, I'm 19 now and living with my girlfriend and her family. One night, I decided that I absolutely needed a midnight snack. My girlfriend had already been knocked out asleep along with her younger brother and her parents. I went downstairs, clutching onto the collar of her American bulldog, because, just like so many times before, I felt the unease of not being alone. For reference, to get to the kitchen, you have to come eye to eye with their sliding glass door that leads to their backyard. I am 100% certain that night that the door was shut and locked. 10,000% certain of it. I end up making myself PB&J when a shiver literally whips through me. I ignore it, of course, and finish making my sandwich and clean up the mess I made before turning around to head back upstairs. I end up turning just to stare at a half-open sliding glass door. I obviously immediately jumped into, oh my god, there's a human in the house right now. So I ran over to the door and shut it and locked it before checking out the entire downstairs. There wasn't a single soul other than me and the dog. I can't really explain how that happened. Even to this day, it fills me with a sense of unease. When I woke up the next morning, I asked my girlfriend's parents if they could have forgotten to lock the door. They stared at me with confused looks before reassuring me that they always double-check that all doors are locked each night. This next situation happened a few months later. My girlfriend and I decided to take a weekend trip back down to my hometown to visit some friends and family. Basically, we joined my one friend at a bonfire that was being hosted at her grandmother's house. To quickly explain it, her grandmother lived on a pretty big plot of land in the middle of nowhere, where the only things surrounding her are back roads, a cornfield, and a thick bundle of trees lining her backyard. My GF wanted to be silly and decided to leave the bonfire and sprint a little over 150 feet to lay on her back a few feet from the lining of the trees. My friend and I ended up just staring at her, waiting for her to pull one of her stupid jokes, when a blood-curdling and utterly bone-chilling scream erupted from the forest. I've never seen my GF get up and run toward us so fast a day in my life. When she got back to us, she was shaking like a leaf with eyes wider than the moon itself. I've been with my girlfriend for 4 years and have never known her to be a liar, and she swore on specific things that she loved that there was something that screamed at me just a few feet away in the trees. She said she didn't see anyone or hear anything. It was dead silent when all of a sudden the scream ripped through the air. It sounded so terrifying that it even unnerved my friend's parents and grandma. This third situation happened not too long ago. My girlfriend ended up having to work at 24 at the fire station, so it was just me, the little brother, and the parents at home. Just like last time, my grumbling stomach kept me from being able to fall asleep. So with a sigh of defeat, I got up and went downstairs to grab food. When I came back up, I was fiddling with trying to lock the puppy gate at the top of the stairs when I heard in a deep, gravelly whisper someone whispering my name all drawn out. I jumped out of my skin and quickly set my plate of food on the ground so that I could pull my phone flashlight up and shine it toward the other end of the hallway. Again, surprise surprise, there was nobody. I was completely alone in a dead silent hallway, so there was zero chance of me mistaking the noise to be a TV or something, as there were no TVs or no noise whatsoever. I ended up peeking my head into her parents' room and her little brother's room. They were all sound asleep, drool and all. I ended up texting my girlfriend about it that night because I was completely freaked out. When I woke up the next morning, I read that she texted me freaking out at 6 a.m. because she was changing in the girls' bathroom at the fire station when she heard a whisper, and she explained it to sound exactly like how mine did, that said hi to her, all drawn out. I can't explain what that even means or what it could be, but it's safe to say that I'm never going to get midnight snacks alone again. This final thing happened just a week ago. I didn't experience it myself, but my GF did. We were downstairs in the middle of the day talking to her mom. The hallway that has the bathroom and the front door is connected to the kitchen, so if you stand in the middle of the kitchen, you can see perfectly down in. My girlfriend randomly lurched forward into the hallway and smacked the wall right next to the bathroom door. I turned around and gave her a confused look because there was nobody there. I watched as she peeked her head into the bathroom, looking like she's expecting someone to be there, when she quickly ducks back out and hurries back toward me. She explained that she turned around and saw the quick motion of a white sleeve/arm moving into the bathroom, as if her little brother quickly ducked into the bathroom to try and hide and scare her, and she ended up catching his sleeve in the action, yet her little brother was at school and her father was in the living room with us. There was absolutely nobody else in the house other than us four. I have no idea if these are all linked in some way or if there's been something that's been following me since I was a child. I'm not sure. I've never seen any figures myself, I just have heard very unexplainable things that are definitely real. What do you guys think? The giggle story. I was just a kid of about 15 or 16 when this happened. This was in the days when just about every kid in school or around the neighborhood had some type of part-time job. It was just a given that once you were old enough to push a lawn mower, shovel a driveway, or rake leaves, you spent a portion of your day working for your own money. As this was decades before the invention of the internet, having a job was something kids just accepted and some jumped into with relish. It was a great excuse to get out of the house and make a little pocket money in the process. My first part-time job was typical for that era. I had a newspaper route. That should give you an idea of how long ago it was. I'm in my late 40s now, but can still remember riding my bicycle to the corner to collect the bundle of papers that had been dropped there, counting them out to make sure I hadn't been shorted, inserting whatever flyers or ads were included for that day, and pedaling door to door for blocks to deliver them. Right here, I can tell you that all that old movie stuff you see of the kid on his bike zipping merrily down the street chucking newspapers blindly in the direction of homes as he passes is complete bullshit. If a kid back then went meandering around the neighborhood flinging newspapers from his bag all willy-nilly, he'd get his ass fired in a hurry. It was kind of a big deal to be a good paper boy. You knew not to ride on the grass, let your bike drop onto anyone's bushes after hopping off, and to keep clear of the flower beds. This was the suburbs, where practically everyone obsessed over how nice their yard looked. So, the better you treated your customers, and their yards, the better the tips were when you collected the money each month, and some even bigger ones come Christmas. They even had trophies for the best paper boy in the county. I even won a trophy once. The thing was 2 feet tall, made of fake gold and marble, with a figurine of a paper boy on top, delivery bag and all, holding a rolled newspaper raised to the sky. This shit was taken seriously. Monday to Friday, the papers were delivered in the afternoon. Saturday and Sunday were the only days back then that the newspaper was delivered in the morning. When I figured out that the bundles were usually dropped as early as 5 a.m., that's when I'd get up to start my route. It wasn't that I was gunning for another trophy, it's just that if you got up that early, it'd still be dark by the time you came home. Then you could just crash back into bed and wake up at your leisure to a free Saturday or Sunday, as if you'd never had to get up in the first place. Paperboy logic. This took place on a Sunday. The Sunday papers sucked to the extent that they were the thickest and required the most inserts, including the comics section, which we still called the funnies, so I often had to take 2 trips, leaving half of my bundle by the street post on the corner to deliver the first part for the route, and then go back for the rest. It could be a pain in the ass, but it was better than getting a hernia and dragging a 2-ton newspaper bag along behind you. The first half of my route was almost entirely apartments. That made for quick deliveries. I could zip into these small, 2-story apartment buildings, set the paper down in front of each door, and zip right back out. 8 deliveries in less than a minute. The second half of my route had houses spread out and around the then sparsely developed area. Right in the middle of my route was what we called the horseshoe. It was a dirt road that formed a U-shape, with the upper prongs connecting to the main road. You'd go down the horseshoe on one side to curve around and go up the other side when on my route. There were only 5 houses spread along the horseshoe, with large gaps between them. There was maybe 1 or 2 street lights along the way, mostly obscured by the branches of overhanging trees. So it was usually pretty dark. If you didn't know the way by heart, you'd be riding into a grove of trees or rolling right into a ditch. That was the main reason that I loved nights with a full moon. The light of the moon shone down on the houses along this dirt road, making it easier to see. Sometimes it wouldn't even seem like it was still nighttime if the moon was really bright and there wasn't any cloud cover. In the winter, with all the fresh snow everywhere, a full moon meant a very well lit route. What follows is the one time I wasn't all that crazy about there being a full moon. Dead center of the horseshoe's curve was a single house perched on a small hill. It was a nice 2-story job, with flowers running the length of the porch, a bench swing at one end near the front door, a 2-car garage, the works. Ideal suburbia. The only thing about this house was that it had the steepest driveway in the neighborhood. So getting up the darn thing was a chore, even if you had good momentum on your bike starting out. Once to the top of Mount Driveway, I just roll up the paper, slide it into the mail slot in the side door by the garage, give it a quick tap to send it inside, and then turn around and enjoy a fast glide down the driveway at top speed even without pedaling. It didn't go quite like that this time. As there was a full moon that night, it was pretty bright, even for 5 in the morning. Lots of houses were painted white or light colors, so they reflected the moonlight well. There was also no wind, which was a huge plus. No worry about the wind yanking the paper out of your hand before you could get it rolled up, and no fighting against the wind either going through your route or coming home. When I rounded the curve at the end of the horseshoe, I was making good time. Even with the Sunday supplement doing its best to weigh me down, I'd already delivered the first half of the route and was looking forward to finishing quick so I could return home to bed. I pedaled up the steep driveway, only having to stop once to push myself along with my sneakers. I dropped the kickstand and dismounted, already digging into my bag for a paper. At the top of the driveway, the whole front of the house practically glowed in the moonlight. Bright white paint, red shutters, all those flowers. It looked kind of pretty. That's when I heard the creak. I stopped, not certain what I'd heard. It was definitely metal, like the hinges on a gate being opened. But there were no gates nearby that I knew of, and none of the houses on the horseshoe had fenced-in yards. Then I heard the creak again, which rose in pitch to a squeak. This time, I recognized the sound immediately. It was the sound of a swing moving. I'd been to every playground in town growing up, so I knew the sound that chains make when you use a swing. There was a kid's playground not far from where I was, but I doubted I could hear one of the swings from that distance. Besides, a quick glance confirmed that the playground was deserted, as it would be at 5 in the morning. The moonlight made that view clear. Then I heard the squeak again, lasting a bit longer. The hair stood up on the back of my neck as I realized that the sound was close. I looked back to the house and saw the bench swing at the end of the porch, suspended from 2 chains. It was rocking back and forth. There was no wind to push it. And there would have to be quite a gust to budge something that heavy, anyway. Then the swing picked up speed, as if someone on it was pumping their legs to get it going. My heart started pounding like crazy. There was nobody on the swing. Not a soul. It was empty, and there was no place to hide beneath it where someone could reach up to push it as a prank. The swing was just swinging back and forth on its own. I was completely terrified but couldn't look away. What the hell was I seeing? There in the light of the full moon, an empty bench swing was rocking higher and higher, back and forth. With nobody sitting in it. That's when I heard it. A giggle. I heard the giggle of a little girl, perhaps 4 or 5 years old at the oldest. My jaw dropped open, and I was physically shaking. Let me emphasize that there was nothing sinister about this giggle at all. This wasn't a menacing laugh or piercing cackle. This was the mischievous, tittering giggle of a very young girl at play. It was coming right from the empty bench swing. I couldn't breathe. I had never felt so frightened in my life. Anybody else at that point would have just run. Or ridden away, pedaling as fast as he could go. But no. I was a good paper boy, and I had the trophy to prove it. Acting solely on reflex, for want of another way to explain it, I yanked one of the bulky Sunday papers from my bag and fumbled with it, trying desperately to roll it. I needed to get rid of that damn thing fast so I could get out of there. The dead air just above the swing let out what sounded like a short chuckle, as if whatever was laughing had tried to cover its mouth. The swing kept swinging. I was gibbering like some kind of lunatic as I fought with the paper. Fold, damn it, fold. Why won't you fold over? I eventually turned with the half-rolled newspaper to push it through the mail slot. It wouldn't fit. It was way too thick. Why did the damn Sunday papers have to be so huge? I pushed, pulled back, and pushed again, doing little more than shredding the front page with failed attempt after failed attempt. Frantically, I kept glancing back at the swing to see if anyone was there. But there was no one. The empty swing continues to rock steadily. I gave up and just rammed the stupid paper into the slot as hard as I could. Squashed into a rumpled mess, half in and half out of the slot, I abandoned the newspaper and scrambled for my bike. I couldn't even get on it. I was shaking so badly and freaking out so much that it was like I had forgotten how to ride a bike. I ran like hell down that steep driveway, dragging the bike behind me by one of the handlebars. Once I reached the dirt road, I finally was able to get onto my bike, but it felt like something had grabbed it, holding it back. I looked down to see the kickstand was still down, digging a thin rut into the dirt beside me. I smashed the thing back with my heel and pedaled for all I was worth. There wasn't another sound of giggling, but the swing rocked a little higher, as if my terror was providing great amusement for whatever sat there. I could still hear the chains on the swing squeak as I took off. At the next house, I didn't give a tinker's damn about paperboy delivery protocol. I just chucked the fat Sunday edition at the door by their garage and was already zooming off before the thing hit the ground. Same for the next house. And the next one. Just like in the movies, right? I think by the time I completed my route that morning, I may have gone back to delivering the newspapers properly. I don't remember now. I didn't remember then. All I could remember was that empty bench swing and that disembodied giggle. When I got home, I did fall back into bed, but I didn't go to sleep. I just stared at the ceiling and felt really scared until the sun came up. The following week, it was business as usual. Afternoon deliveries were the same as normal, and come the weekend, I made sure there were fresh batteries in my Walkman so that I could drown out any unearthly giggling with the songs of Kenny Loggins or Michael Jackson. I never did hear the giggle again, not that I wanted to. The swing only ever rocked when a person was in it or when we were in the midst of a January blizzard. Even then, it only moved a little under the pounding wind. Like I said, it was heavy. Nothing else creepy or unusual ever happened on my paper route again. Even with what had happened, I realize it could have been worse. I mean, that giggle wasn't followed by any sudden footsteps as an invisible ghost child leapt off the swing to come running after me. That would have made for one hell of a story, but most likely one that ended with me suffering heart failure or winding up in a mental institution. To this day, I have no explanation for that giggle. Some say I was being pranked, others tell me it was a spirit or sprite of some kind. All I can tell you is that I know what it's like to be scared by a prank or unnerved by a ghost story. Later in life, I even had a panic attack a few times. So I know what it's like to feel scared. But nothing, ever, has left me as scared as I was that Sunday morning under the full moon when I heard that giggle.